Story 1: The Temporal Highway. Robert Hayes had been on the road for nearly 20 years running cross-country freight for a logistics company based out of Topeka. The open road was in his blood. He'd seen every kind of dawn, those quiet pink Midwest mornings, the fog-obscured Carolina hills, and California sunsets that turned the sky orange like cooling steel. But none of that could have prepared him for what happened in May of 2023. It began like any other night run out of Oklahoma City. Robert was hauling electronic components to Denver, expecting to cross the Panhandle by dawn. He kept to his familiar route, US 270 to 287, then north through Amarillo. His GPS plotted everything perfectly. The truck smelled faintly of diesel and pine-scented air freshener. The hum of the engine was his lullaby. But as he rolled into the dark stretch near Boise City, something unusual began to unfold. The console clock flickered, jumped ahead 12 minutes, then back again. Robert gave it a glance and shrugged. Electrical interference wasn't rare. He adjusted the CB and checked in with another driver, Carl from Memphis, about 20 miles ahead. "You seeing that lightning up north?" Robert asked. "Ain't no lightning, buddy," came Carl's reply, sounding distant, crackled. "Just clear skies for me." Robert frowned. The clouds he saw weren't normal storm clouds. They pulsed like breath, fading in and out of existence. He topped a hill, expecting the glow of Boise City ahead, but only endless highway stretched out. Flat, silver, and silent. At first he thought he'd missed his turn. He checked his GPS, signal unavailable. The map had frozen. Ahead, the two-lane blacktop curved where it shouldn't. His headlights illuminated a sign, Route 191 North, but that wasn't right. There was no Route 191 anywhere near Boise City. Robert slowed, shoulders tightening. He'd driven that corridor dozens of times. The landmarks, the old grain silos, the rusted water tower, the derelict Sinclair station were all gone. Just mesquite scrub, wind, and that shimmering road. He almost stopped then, but curiosity won. He radioed again. "Carl, what mile marker you at?" A burst of static answered him, then nothing but dead air. Robert pressed on, watching the odometer tick higher. His dashboard clock began flashing random digits. The temperature gauge plunged below 0, then climbed past 110. "Electronics glitching," he muttered. The truck's radio kicked in without prompting, half static, half an old Hank Williams tune, warbling like a ghost's breath. He reached for his phone. It read 2:14 a.m., then abruptly jumped to 2:14 again, the seconds looping. The highway had no mile markers anymore, only an occasional broken reflector stick jutting out of the asphalt. He drove another 20 minutes by his analog watch before realizing something horrifying. The horizon hadn't changed at all. The darkness became thick, oppressive. Normally a distant town glow or even the pale band of highway side lights meant civilization. But Robert's world was swallowed whole. The truck's high beams only carved a tunnel ahead. He saw movement on the periphery, an afterimage of another rig pacing him perfectly parallel through the scrubland, although there was no road there. It looked identical. His same paint job, even the same dangling mud flaps. His chest grew cold. He downshifted, slowing to 55. The twin kept pace. He flicked the headlights off and on. Instantly, the parallel truck vanished. The hair on Robert's arms lifted. When he turned the high beams back on, he expected empty terrain, but the asphalt was now unfamiliar. Crumbling, cracked, covered in weeds. Faded yellow lines meandered like scars. He stopped completely, engine idling. Desert silence engulfed everything except for a faint hum like distant power lines. But there were no poles, no lights. Robert killed the engine and stepped out, gravel crunching under his boots. The air felt heavy, electric. The stars above looked wrong, more clustered, brighter, almost too close. And then came the smell, ozone mixed with something metallic like burnt copper. He heard distant tires squeal, maybe echoes bouncing through the mesas, except the sound never faded. It hovered, looping endlessly. Robert climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and tried starting the engine. Nothing. Dead silence. Every gauge needle pointed upward. He cycled the ignition again. The dash lights glowed blood red, letters flickering nonsense. Outside, a dim figure walked toward his truck from the roadside ditch. A silhouette wearing an old-style highway patrol uniform, circa the 1960s, broad hat and all. The figure raised a flashlight that emitted no light, yet Robert could see its beam sweeping across his windshield. He picked up the CB mic. "You all right, officer?" The figure stopped 10 feet away and tilted its head. Then the voice of Carl crackled through the speaker, except it came out distorted and delayed. "Turn back. Turn back. You're not supposed to be here." Robert's stomach dropped. He shouted back into the mic, "Carl, what the hell is going on?" Silence. Then the strange figure outside mouthed those same words, perfectly synchronized. "Turn back," and vanished with a ripple like heat distortion. Panic surged. Robert started hammering the ignition again. The rig roared alive, a deafening sound that comforted him like a heartbeat. He threw it into gear and barreled forward. The road was splitting at seams, asphalt spider-cracking under his tires. He felt the steering wheel jerk left sharply, though he hadn't moved it. His GPS flickered back on, showing coordinates spinning like a malfunctioning compass. For one frozen second, every digital clock, phone, and even his watch synchronized 2:14 a.m. again. He drove without reason, just to outrun the sensation that the world behind him was collapsing. The horizon shimmered again, an orange band like dawn breaking. But dawn should have been hours away. He saw a town rising ahead, water tower, lit windows, even the faint glow of a diner sign. Relief washed over him. But as he entered the outskirts, everything looked wrong. The vehicles parked along the street were vintage. Old Chevys with chrome fenders, rusted tractors. A billboard read, "Welcome to Manson, Oklahoma, population 312. Robert knew every small town from Oklahoma City to Denver. There was no Manson on any map. His phone showed no signal but displayed a local time of March 5th, 1973. His stomach clenched. He rolled slowly down Main Street, watching people in period clothing stare motionlessly from behind shop windows. Static, waxy, like mannequins mid-motion. Then, as his truck idled, every figure turned its head toward him simultaneously. Their faces were clear yet wrong, with eyes too glassy, mouths trembling like film caught on repeat. Robert stomped the accelerator, tires screaming. The scene smeared away as he tore through town limits. When he looked in the mirror, the street was gone, replaced by barren prairie again. Hours passed, though he couldn't mark them. His fuel gauge hadn't moved. He drove until exhaustion blurred reality. Then, as suddenly as it began, his GPS rebooted. Location found, US 287 northbound. A wave of nausea hit him. His radio came back to life. Carl's voice, normal this time, saying, "Hey buddy, you there? You broke off for a while." Robert felt tears sting his eyes. "Carl," he croaked, "what time you got?" "Same as you, probably," came the casual reply. 2:14. "Long night, huh?" The world tilted. Robert slammed brakes, staring at his phone. 2:14 again. Just once he needed to know the truth. He stepped out, smelling gasoline and dry wind. He picked up a rock, tossed it down the roadside drainage channel, and watched it hang mid-fall, suspended, vibrating as if reality had paused. Then in the next instant he was blind. White flash, soundless expanse. His body felt weightless, mind spinning. When awareness returned, dawn was breaking properly. He was parked on the shoulder near Boise City, dispatch buzzing him to check in. The timestamp read 6:42 a.m. His delivery papers were unsigned, fuel logs hours late, but his odometer hadn't advanced more than 4 miles. Weeks later, Robert reviewed the dashcam footage. It cut off abruptly just past midnight, then resumed 6 hours later with static and a faint outline of a man standing in front of the truck, face indistinct, hand raised as if blessing him. Forensics from the logistics company found nothing. Robert turned in his resignation the next day, citing health reasons. In the months that followed, he grew obsessed with timestamps. His wall clock at home occasionally froze at always 2:14. Once he caught a reflection in his kitchen window. Himself, leaning in an angle slightly off, like a delayed video frame. He never drove again. Friends said he spent hours on Google Earth searching for Route 191, Manson, Oklahoma, anything. But nothing existed by that name in any state archive. When asked what he thought happened, Robert could only answer, "I think I drove into a loop, and I think a piece of me never came back out." The last note in his journal, found after he disappeared in August of 2024, read, "If you see me on the road between Boise City and Amarillo, don't stop. It's not me. It's 2:14 again." You're absolutely right. Story 2 is only 822 words, not 2,500. Let me write the complete full-length 2,500-word version. Story 2, The Shifting Mile Marker. Patricia Sullivan had logged over 15 years behind the wheel of big rigs, hauling refrigerated goods from the Midwest to the Pacific Northwest. By May of 2024, she'd driven every stretch of Interstate 90 at least twice, from Chicago's industrial sprawl to the misty forests of Washington state. Her rig, an 18-wheeler she'd nicknamed Silver Ghost, was an extension of herself. She took pride in her spotless logs, punctual deliveries, and the faint aroma of peppermint oil she kept in the cab to stay alert. Patricia was known among dispatchers as reliable, steady, never late, but nothing in her career, no amount of night driving or bad weather, could have prepared her for what happened on that desolate stretch of highway near Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. It was a night that would fracture her understanding of roads, distances, and reality itself. The evening started normally enough. She'd picked up a load of frozen seafood in Missoula, Montana, bound for a distribution center outside Seattle. The paperwork was clean, the trailer sealed, and her fuel tanks topped off. Patricia rolled out just after sunset, the sky painted in streaks of burnt orange and violet. She planned to cross into Idaho by midnight, grab a quick fuel stop at the familiar station near mile marker 304A, then push through to Spokane before dawn. She'd made this run dozens of times. Every curve, every grade, every rest area was etched into her muscle memory. She knew where the cell signal dropped, where the deer crossings were most dangerous, and exactly which exit had the cleanest restrooms. But that night, something fundamental changed. It began just past midnight. Patricia's eyes stung from hours of staring at white lines and taillights. The highway was nearly empty, just the occasional westbound semi passing in a blur of wind and diesel fumes. Her only company was the low hum of the auxiliary power unit and the intermittent crackle of CB radio chatter. Drivers checking in, warning about black ice, complaining about DOT inspections. Mile marker 304A had always been her landmark, the last fuel stop before the long, grinding climb over Lookout Pass. She gunned the engine slightly, anticipating the downhill coast into the station. But when the marker finally loomed into view under her headlights, something was wrong. The reflective numbers read 305. Patricia frowned, easing off the throttle. It couldn't be right. Mile marker 304A should have appeared first. It always did. She'd passed it hundreds of times. Instead, the highway unspooled endlessly ahead of her. No exit ramp, no distant glow of fuel pumps, just endless blacktop disappearing under a waning moon. She glanced at her GPS unit mounted on the dash. The screen showed her route clearly. Next fuel stop, 32 miles. That didn't align with the geography she knew. The station at 304A should be less than 5 miles ahead. The screen flickered once, twice, then switched to a gray error message. Map data unavailable. Patricia felt her first flutter of unease. She'd driven through dead zones before, but never here. This stretch of I-90 had consistent satellite coverage. She tapped the screen, tried rebooting it. Nothing. The device remained frozen on that gray screen, coordinates spinning uselessly. She keyed the CB mic, her voice steady but laced with confusion. Breaker, breaker. Any units near mile marker 304A on I-90 westbound? Silence answered her, just the faint hiss of static. She tried again, adjusting the squelch. This is Silver Ghost looking for a 1036 on mile marker 304A. Anybody copy? A crackled voice finally responded, distant and garbled. You passed it half an hour ago. Patricia's stomach flipped. She'd been monitoring her position carefully. She recalled seeing mile marker 300 maybe 10 minutes earlier. There was no way she'd passed 304A half an hour ago. That would mean she'd been driving backward or time itself had warped. She glanced at her wristwatch, 12:27 a.m. Her logbook showed she'd passed 300 at 12:22. Simple math, impossible discrepancy. She tapped the brake, slowing to 40 miles per hour. The air outside, visible through the cracked driver's window, smelled wrong. Damp pine mixed with something metallic like gasoline vapor or ozone before a lightning strike. Up ahead, another sign emerged from the darkness, its reflective letters glowing unnaturally bright under her high beams. Mile marker 304A. Relief washed over Patricia. There it was. She must have misread the earlier sign. Road fatigue, playing tricks. She accelerated again, scanning for the familiar exit ramp and the blue fuel station sign. But as her truck passed the marker, the sign seemed to shimmer and dissolve into the darkness behind her. No exit ramp, no station lights. Just a narrow, unmarked turnoff lined with sagging metal guardrails barely visible in the periphery of her taillights. Patricia's heart began to pound. Something was fundamentally wrong. She flicked on her hazard lights and made a snap decision. Veer onto that turnoff. Maybe the station had been moved. Maybe construction had rerouted the exit. She eased the rig onto the off-ramp, tires crunching over loose gravel and cracked, icy pavement. The descent was steeper than any legal grade. Her trailer swayed slightly. At the bottom, the road flattened into a single-lane strip carved between thick Douglas firs. Fog clung to the ground like spilled milk. A rusted stop sign stood at a T intersection with no street name, no directional arrows. Just that lone octagon commanding her to halt. Patricia killed the engine. The sudden silence was oppressive. No wind, no animal sounds, not even the distant hum of highway traffic above. She grabbed her flashlight and paper atlas from behind the seat. She'd always carried a physical map, a habit from her early driving days before GPS. Flipping to the Idaho page, she traced I-90 with her finger. No service road existed at this location. No intersection. The map showed only continuous interstate with a single marked rest area miles west. Frantically, she scanned the trees surrounding her. To her left, through the mist, something glimmered. A chain-link fence topped with coiled barbed wire catching faint light from somewhere beyond. Faint yellow lights like sodium vapor lamps glowed in the distance. Patricia climbed down from the cab, boots sinking into wet earth. The air smelled of mildew and rust. She approached the fence slowly, flashlight beam cutting through fog. The fence surrounded what appeared to be an abandoned rest area. Picnic tables sat rotting under corrugated metal shelters, their surfaces covered in graffiti, crude drawings, nonsensical phrases, dates that made no sense. One read July 1987 in faded spray paint. Another said Turn back while you can. Patricia's skin prickled. In the center of the rest area stood a phone booth, impossibly intact amid the decay. Its glass panels were stained yellow but unbroken, and the aluminum frame showed no rust. The booth's light was off, yet it seemed to glow faintly from within. Patricia found a gap in the fence where the wire had been peeled back. Against every instinct, she squeezed through, fabric snagging on metal barbs. She crossed the cracked concrete toward the booth. The door squeaked on corroded hinges as she pulled it open. Inside, an old rotary phone sat on its cradle, the handset's spiral cord coiling into darkness beneath the booth. The receiver was surprisingly clean, smelling faintly of plastic and old perfume. Curious and desperate for any connection to the outside world, Patricia lifted the receiver to her ear. Dead silence, not even the hum of an open line. Then after 5 long seconds, a dial tone crackled to life. Her breath caught. The tone was wrong, pulsing irregularly like a heartbeat, and beneath it, faint and distant, came a whisper. Patricia. Her name spoken in a voice she didn't recognize, feminine, hollow, layered with static. The blood drained from Patricia's face. She hadn't told anyone her name. The voice grew louder, more insistent. Patricia Sullivan, you shouldn't be here. Not yet. Terror seized her. She slammed the receiver, down, the clatter echoing unnaturally loud. Backing away from the booth, her heel caught on a metal grate set into the ground. She stumbled, flashlight spinning from her hand. The beam illuminated concrete slabs surrounding the grate, each stamped with faded letters. Restricted access, U.S. Department of Transportation, 1974. 1974. 50 years ago. This rest area had been closed for half a century, yet the phone worked. Beyond the fence, those yellow lights suddenly swelled in intensity, shifting from warm amber to a cold surgical blue. The ground beneath Patricia's feet trembled, a low vibration that climbed through her boots into her chest. She scrambled toward the fence gap, heart hammering. Behind her, the phone booth's light flickered on, illuminating the interior in harsh white fluorescence. The rotary phone was ringing, its mechanical bell clanging over and over. Patricia didn't look back. She squeezed through the fence, metal clawing at her jacket. She sprinted to her rig, fumbling with the keys. Her hands shook violently. Finally, the key slid home. She twisted the ignition. The engine turned over with a defiant roar. She threw the transmission into reverse, but the steering wheel locked solid, refusing to turn. The cab windows began to fog from within, condensation spreading in seconds despite the dry air outside. On the windshield, smeared patterns appeared, handprints, as if someone had pressed their palms and fingers against the glass from outside. But there was no one there. Patricia's breath came in ragged gasps. She grabbed the CB mic, shouting into it, "Mayday, Mayday, dispatch, do you copy? This is Silver Ghost, I need immediate assistance." Only static answered, thick and buzzing. Then impossibly, her own voice crackled through the speaker. "Mayday, Mayday, Silver Ghost." The words echoed, distorted, layered over themselves like a recording played backward. The radio winked off. Her headlights flickered wildly, illuminating the scene behind her in stuttering snapshots. The rest area was fully lit now, dozens of pale lanterns floating above the picnic table, swaying though there was no wind. Shadows moved between the trees, tall, thin figures that didn't walk but glided, their forms twisting and stretching like living smoke. Patricia's vision tunneled, pure survival instinct took over. She stomped the accelerator, wrenching the steering wheel with all her strength. The lock broke with a metallic snap. The rig lurched forward, tires screaming on wet pavement. She aimed for the road out, the single-lane strip she'd descended. Behind her, the trailer clipped the fence. Metal screeched, barbed wire shredding the side panels in a shower of sparks. She didn't care. She drove, accelerator pinned, climbing the grade back toward the highway. The fog thickened, then suddenly parted. Her headlights caught the familiar white lines of I-90. The mile markers resumed their normal sequence, 305, 306, 307. The digital clock on her dash blinked back to life. 12:34 a.m. Only 7 minutes had passed since she'd turned off. The diesel gauge needle quivered but held steady above a quarter tank. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder, dispatch checking in with a routine status update. Patricia stammered an excuse about a detour, claimed she'd pulled over for a quick rest. Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. As she drove on through the night, the world seemed to straighten, reality resuming its familiar course. The GPS recalibrated, showing her exact position. The CB chatter returned, drivers complaining about fog, someone requesting a weather update. Everything normal. But Patricia was irrevocably changed. She completed the delivery to Seattle on time, said nothing to dispatch about the missing 7 minutes or the damage to her trailer. She claimed a low-clearance scrape at a loading dock. For weeks afterward, she counted every mile marker from Coeur d'Alene to Seattle, never trusting the numbers. At rest stops, she avoided talking to strangers, refused to look at maps too closely. She began recording her odometer reading at every stop, cross-referencing them obsessively in a notebook. Yet sometimes, late at night when the highway was empty, she glimpsed something in her peripheral vision. A mile marker ahead reading 304A on I-90, or a service road disappearing into fog where none should exist. She never found that rest area again. She tried once, deliberately exiting at every unmarked turnoff near that stretch. Nothing. Just forest service roads and dead ends. On clear nights when the moon was waning, she'd swear she saw faint lantern lights bobbing in the distance beyond the tree line, beckoning her off the highway. Her CB occasionally picked up fragments of that voice, always during the early morning hours. Patricia, come back. You left something here. She began refusing routes through Idaho altogether, taking longer southern paths that added hours to her trips. Dispatch questioned her efficiency. She offered no explanations. Other drivers whispered that Sullivan had lost her nerve, burned out after too many years on the road. But Patricia knew the truth. She hadn't lost her nerve. She'd lost something far more fundamental. A piece of herself remained in that rest area, in that moment outside time. And whatever inhabited that place had recognized her, marked her, and was waiting patiently for her return. On the anniversary of that night, exactly 1 year later, Patricia's rig was found idling on the shoulder of I-90 near mile marker 304. The engine was running, lights on, logbook open to a fresh page. But the cab was empty. Her seatbelt was unbuckled, driver's door ajar. On the windshield, written in condensation, were the words, "Welcome back, Patricia." Search teams combed the surrounding forest for weeks. They found no trace of her, no footprints, no signs of struggle. The only anomaly was a faint trail leading to an old, fenced-off rest area long closed by the Department of Transportation. Inside, investigators found a phone booth with a working rotary phone. When they tested it, the line was dead. But in the booth's aluminum frame, scratched into the metal with something sharp, was a list of names and dates. The last entry read, Patricia Sullivan, May 2025. The rest area was demolished 3 months later. Yet drivers still report strange occurrences near that mile marker. Voices on the CB calling names, GPS units freezing, and sometimes late at night a woman's voice asking for directions to a fuel stop that no longer exists. Story 3. The Cargo That Breathed. Marcus Thompson had been hauling specialized freight for 12 years, mostly chemical containers and industrial equipment that required hazmat certification. By September of 2023, he'd transported everything from radioactive medical isotopes to experimental polymers. His Peterbilt 389 was equipped with temperature controls, air filtration systems, and GPS tracking that reported directly to corporate headquarters. Marcus took pride in his safety record. 0 incidents, 0 complaints, 0 questions asked. He was the driver companies called when they needed something moved quietly and without complications. But the job that nearly destroyed his sanity came from a client he'd never heard of. Meridian Research Solutions, located in a nondescript office park outside Albuquerque, New Mexico. The pickup seemed routine enough. 3 sealed containers, each roughly the size of a coffin, weighing exactly 200 pounds according to the manifest. The paperwork listed the contents as biological research materials, temperature sensitive. Marcus had hauled similar loads before. Lab specimens, tissue cultures, even preserved organs for medical research. The destination was a facility in Salt Lake City, a 14-hour drive he could complete with 1 mandatory rest break. He arrived at Meridian just before noon on a scorching September day. The building was newer than most in the area, all glass and steel with tinted windows that revealed nothing inside. A loading dock sat behind the structure, accessed through an alley that seemed designed to discourage casual visitors. Dr. Sarah Chen met him at the dock, a slight woman in her 40s wearing a white lab coat and latex gloves. She spoke in clipped professional tones, explaining the temperature requirements. Precisely 32 degrees Fahrenheit plus or minus half a degree, and the need for complete environmental sealing. These materials are extremely sensitive to vibration and temperature fluctuation, she emphasized, handing him a tablet to sign. Any deviation from protocol could compromise years of research. Marcus nodded, watching as 2 technicians wheeled the containers from the building. They moved carefully, almost reverently, as if handling something precious or dangerous. The containers themselves were unremarkable. Brushed aluminum with digital temperature displays and sealed access ports. But as the first one was loaded into his trailer, Marcus noticed something odd. The container's surface was warm to the touch despite the refrigeration system running at full capacity. He mentioned this to Dr. Chen, who dismissed his concern with a wave. Internal heat generation is normal for this type of research. The cooling system will compensate. She handed him a sealed envelope. Additional instructions. Don't open until you're on the road. Marcus secured the containers according to hazmat protocols, tested the trailer's climate controls twice, and pulled out of the facility just after 2 p.m. The first 2 hours passed without incident. He made good time heading north on US 285, the containers maintaining their required temperature. But as he climbed into the high desert outside Santa Fe, he began to notice irregularities. The temperature displays on all 3 containers started fluctuating, not dramatically, but enough to trigger warning alarms on his monitoring system. Marcus pulled into a truck stop near Espanola to investigate. The containers looked normal from the outside, but when he pressed his ear to the first one, he heard something that made his blood freeze. A rhythmic sound. Soft, but distinct, like breathing. He backed away, checking the other containers. Same sound, all 3 of them synchronized like a sleeping person's respiration. He grabbed his phone, called the emergency number Dr. Chen had provided. No answer. He left a voicemail describing what he'd heard, then opened the sealed envelope she'd given him. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed instructions. In case of temperature warnings or unusual sounds, do not attempt to open containers. Continue to destination. Contact emergency number if absolutely necessary. Failure to deliver may result in catastrophic consequences. Catastrophic consequences. The phrase sent chills down Marcus's spine. He'd transported hazardous materials before, but never with language that ominous. He checked his watch. 6:30 p.m. Still 8 hours to Salt Lake City. He climbed back into the cab, cranked the refrigeration system to maximum and resumed driving. But the breathing sounds grew louder, more pronounced. By the time he reached Los Alamos, he could hear them through the cab's insulated walls. Worse, the containers were heating up despite the cooling system running at full power. The temperature displays showed rising numbers. 34 degrees, 36, 40. His phone buzzed with automatic alerts from the monitoring system. He tried calling Dr. Chen again. Still no answer. Dispatch was equally unhelpful. They had no record of Meridian Research Solutions in their client database. As darkness fell over the New Mexico highlands, Marcus faced a terrible decision. Pull over and risk whatever catastrophic consequences Dr. Chen had mentioned, or continue driving with cargo. That was clearly malfunctioning. The breathing sounds were accompanied now by other noises, scraping, tapping, as if something inside the containers was moving. At a rest area near Ghost Ranch, he stopped to inspect the containers again. All three were hot to the touch, their temperature displays reading over 50 degrees. The breathing had changed rhythm, becoming faster, more urgent. And then he heard something that nearly made him bolt. A voice, muffled but unmistakably human, calling from inside the first container. Help. Me. Marcus's hands shook as he examined the container's sealed access ports. Every instinct told him to open them to help whoever was trapped inside. But the warnings about catastrophic consequences held him back. Instead, he pressed his face to the container's surface and whispered, "I can hear you. What do you need?" The voice responded immediately. "So cold. Can't breathe." Marcus realized with growing horror that these weren't research materials at all. These were people, living people, sealed inside refrigerated coffins. He grabbed a crowbar from his toolkit, preparing to break open the access port. But as he raised the tool, all three containers fell silent simultaneously. No breathing, no voices, no movement. The temperature displays flickered and died. Whatever had been alive inside was now still. Marcus staggered away from his trailer, phone in hand. He dialed 911, but when the operator answered, the words stuck in his throat. How could he explain what he'd heard? How could he prove it? He ended the call without speaking and tried Dr. Chen's number again. This time someone answered, but it wasn't her voice. It was the same voice he'd heard from inside the container, pleading and desperate. "Help me, it's so cold. Can't breathe." Marcus threw the phone, watching it shatter against the asphalt. He was losing his mind, had to be. The stress of the job, the isolation, the strange cargo, it was all combining to create auditory hallucinations. He forced himself to continue driving. The containers remained silent for the next 3 hours, their temperature systems apparently functional again. Marcus tried to convince himself he'd imagined everything, that biological research materials could make all kinds of sounds as they decomposed or reacted to temperature changes. But deep down, he knew what he'd heard. Those were human voices, human breathing, human suffering. As he crossed into Utah near midnight, his CB radio crackled to life. A familiar voice came through the speaker. "Marcus Thompson, why didn't you help us?" It was the voice from the container, transmitted somehow through his radio. He yanked the CB cord from its socket, but the voice continued, now coming from his truck's AM/FM radio, then from his phone's broken speaker, then from everywhere at once. The voices multiplied, 3 distinct people, all begging for help, all asking why he hadn't opened the containers. Marcus covered his ears and screamed, but the voices penetrated everything. They described the cold, The suffocation, the slow realization that they were being transported like cargo. They told him their names: David Martinez, a homeless man who'd accepted money to participate in a medical study; Jennifer Walsh, a graduate student who'd volunteered for what she thought was sleep research; Thomas Kim, a terminal cancer patient promised experimental treatment. All three had signed consent forms they couldn't read, had been sedated and sealed into containers while still alive. By dawn, Marcus was barely functional. The voices had continued all night, describing their deaths in horrifying detail. They spoke of feeling the truck's movements, hearing Marcus's footsteps outside their containers, hoping desperately that someone would save them. But the cold had slowed their metabolisms, made them weak until they could only whisper. Marcus had heard their final moments, their last breaths condensing against aluminum walls. He reached Salt Lake City at 7 a.m., delivered the containers to a medical facility that claimed to know nothing about their contents. The receiving technicians were different from the ones in Albuquerque, wearing full hazmat suits and speaking in hushed tones. They wouldn't let Marcus inspect the containers before unloading them. Driving home empty, Marcus tried to piece together what had happened. Meridian Research Solutions vanished. Their building in Albuquerque was vacant, no forwarding address. Dr. Chen's phone number was disconnected. His dispatch claimed they'd received the job request through an anonymous broker, payment processed through an untraceable cryptocurrency account. Marcus reported the incident to police, FBI, anyone who would listen. But without evidence, no bodies, no facility, no witnesses. His story sounded like the ravings of a sleep-deprived trucker. Internal Affairs investigated his claims but found no proof of wrongdoing. The containers had been delivered as contracted. The manifest showed only biological research materials. Case closed. But Marcus's nightmare was just beginning. The voices followed him home, whispering from his truck's cab, his house's ventilation system, even his dreams. They weren't angry, just sad, confused, asking why he hadn't helped them when he'd known they were alive. He started drinking heavily, trying to drown out their pleas. He lost his commercial license after failing a random drug test. His wife left him, unable to cope with his paranoid ravings about government experiments and human trafficking. Friends avoided him. Former colleagues whispered that Thompson had finally cracked under the pressure. 6 months later, Marcus disappeared from his apartment in Phoenix. Police found his truck parked in the desert outside Albuquerque, engine running, doors open. In the sleeper compartment, investigators discovered a notebook filled with rambling entries about the cargo that breathed and detailed drawings of aluminum containers. The final entry read, "They're calling me back. David, Jennifer, Thomas, they want me to join them. Maybe it's time. Maybe I deserve this for not helping when I could have." Search teams combed the desert for weeks but found no trace of Marcus Thompson. The case was eventually classified as a probable suicide. But truck drivers passing through that area still report strange CB transmissions late at night. Multiple voices pleading for help, begging someone to open the containers and let them breathe. And sometimes, parked on remote desert roads, they glimpse an empty Peterbilt with its hazard lights flashing, as if waiting for cargo that will never come. Story 4. The Phantom Convoy. Leonard Hayes had been driving cross-country routes for 18 years, specializing in overnight hauls that most drivers avoided. By July of 2024, he'd developed a reputation for reliability and an uncanny ability to stay alert through the loneliest stretches of American highway. His Kenworth W900 was his home more than his apartment in Tulsa ever was. He knew every truck stop between the Atlantic and Pacific, every shortcut through the Midwest, and every highway patrol habit in 48 states. But nothing in his experience prepared him for the night he encountered the Phantom Convoy on Interstate 80 through the Nebraska Sandhills. It started innocuously enough. Leonard had picked up a load of electronics in Des Moines, bound for Reno. He'd planned to make Cheyenne by dawn, which meant pushing through the night across Nebraska's emptiest corridors. He departed Iowa just after 9 p.m., the summer sky still holding onto twilight's last purple glow. The highway stretched ahead like a ribbon of gray silk, rolling over gentle hills covered in prairie grass. Traffic was light, a few cars, the occasional westbound semi passing in the opposite lane. His CB radio crackled with routine chatter. Drivers warning about construction near Omaha. Someone asking about diesel prices in North Platte. Leonard settled into his seat, sipped cold coffee from a thermos, and watched the mile markers tick past. By 11 p.m., he was deep into the Sandhills region, where civilization gave way to vast grasslands, interrupted only by windmills and distant ranch lights. The highway curved gently through this landscape, rising and falling over hills that seemed to repeat endlessly. Leonard had driven this stretch dozens of times, usually seeing no more than a handful of vehicles per hour. But tonight felt different. The air had a peculiar density, and the stars overhead seemed brighter, closer, as if the atmosphere had thinned. His radio went quiet. No chatter, just empty static. He adjusted the squelch, checked the frequency. Nothing wrong mechanically, just silence where there should be voices. Then, cresting a hill near mile marker 237, Leonard saw them. A convoy of trucks stretched ahead in perfect formation. 6 rigs spaced exactly 100 feet apart, all traveling at identical speeds. Their taillights glowed red against the darkness, but something about them seemed wrong. The lights were too dim, too diffuse, as if filtered through fog. Yet the night was crystal clear, stars sharp overhead. Leonard maintained his speed, expecting to catch up to the rear truck gradually. But after 5 minutes of driving, the distance between them hadn't changed. The convoy remained perpetually ahead, neither growing closer nor pulling away, despite Leonard's speedometer showing 70 miles per hour. He keyed his CB mic. "Breaker for that convoy westbound at mile marker 240. You boys running a special haul?" Static answered him. He tried again, adjusting frequencies. No response. The convoy continued its steady progression, and Leonard noticed other oddities. None of the trucks had company markings. No logos, no dot numbers visible, just plain dark trailers that absorbed light. Their chrome was dull, lifeless. And most disturbingly, none of them showed any variation in speed or position. They moved as one entity, mechanically perfect. Leonard accelerated to 75, then 80 miles per hour. The convoy's distance remained unchanged, as if he were chasing a mirage that retreated at precisely his speed. Unease crept into Leonard's chest. He'd heard stories from other drivers about strange sightings on lonely highways, ghost lights, phantom hitchhikers, vehicles that defied explanation. He'd always dismissed them as fatigue-induced hallucinations or tall tales spun at truck stops. But this was different. This was real, measurable, impossible. The convoy stayed ahead for another 20 miles, unchanging. Then, as Leonard approached mile marker 260, something shifted. The lead truck in the formation began to slow. Its taillights brightened, brake lights illuminating. The second truck slowed in perfect synchronization, then the third, fourth, fifth, sixth. They decelerated as one unit, dropping from highway speed to perhaps 40 miles per hour. Leonard slowed as well, maintaining his distance out of instinct. The convoy pulled into the right lane, then, impossibly, onto an exit ramp that shouldn't exist. Leonard knew this stretch intimately. There was no exit at mile marker 260. The next interchange was 15 miles ahead near Ogallala. But the convoy was definitely exiting, following a ramp that curved away into darkness. Leonard's headlights caught the exit sign as he passed. Route 92 South, services. His blood went cold. Route 92 didn't intersect I-80 at this location. He grabbed his truck atlas, flipped to Nebraska. The map confirmed his memory. No exit here, no Route 92 connection. Against every rational instinct, Leonard took the next available crossover median, used by emergency vehicles and maintenance crews. He doubled back eastbound, then crossed again to westbound, searching for that exit ramp. It took him 20 minutes to navigate back to mile marker 260. When he reached the location, there was no exit ramp, just continuous interstate, grass-covered embankments, and barbed wire fencing stretching into darkness. He pulled onto the shoulder, killed his engine, and sat in stunned silence. His headlights illuminated empty highway. No ramp, no sign, no indication that 6 trucks had just vanished into non-existent infrastructure. Leonard climbed from his cab, flashlight in hand. He walked along the shoulder, examining the ground. No tire tracks left the pavement. The grass showed no disturbance. The fence was intact, rusty barbed wire strung between weathered posts. He must have hallucinated the entire thing. Exhaustion, bad coffee, some trick of starlight and shadow. But as he turned back to his truck, his flashlight beam caught something in the grass 20 feet from the highway. A chrome mud flap, old and corroded, partially buried in soil. He knelt and pulled it free. The metal was cold, pitted with rust. Embossed on the flap was a logo, Midwest Transport Co., and below that a date, Estorner 1952. Leonard photographed the mud flap with his phone, then carried it back to his truck. He climbed into the cab, heart racing, and tried searching online for Midwest Transport Company. The results chilled him. The company had operated throughout the 1950s and 60s, running regular routes across Nebraska and Wyoming. In August of 1967, 6 of their trucks had vanished during a single night. All 6 drivers hauling various goods westbound on what was then Highway 30, later incorporated into I-80, had departed North Platte within an hour of each other. None reached their destinations. No wreckage was ever found, no bodies recovered, no explanation offered. The company went bankrupt within a year, and the mystery faded into regional folklore. Leonard sat frozen, mud flap cold in his hands. He'd just witnessed those trucks, 57 years after they disappeared, still driving westbound, still maintaining formation, still searching for a destination they'd never reach. He resumed driving, but the night had transformed. Every shadow seemed deeper, every distant light potentially supernatural. He kept his speed conservative, eyes darting between mirrors and windshield. At mile marker 280, his CB radio suddenly erupted with voices, 6 different men all speaking simultaneously in overlapping chatter. Lost the highway, Lardum. Where's the exit? Following the lead truck. Can't find North Platte. Fuel running low. Someone respond. Leonard grabbed his mic. This is westbound Kenworth at mile marker 280. I can hear you. What's your location? The voices stopped abruptly. Silence returned, thick and oppressive. Then a single voice came through, older, gravelly, heavy with confusion. Son, I don't know where we are. We've been driving all night, but nothing looks right. The stars are wrong. The highway's too smooth. Can you see us? Leonard's throat constricted. I saw you. 6 trucks traveling together westbound. A pause, then. We've been looking for the exit to Ogallala since midnight. My watch says it's 12:30, but that can't be right. We've driven 200 miles at least. Leonard checked his clock. 1:15 a.m., July 16, 2024. But for these drivers, it was still August 12, 1967, the night they'd vanished. Sir, Leonard said carefully, I need you to listen. You're not going to find Ogallala, not the one you remember. You need to stop driving. Pull over and wait for help. The voice responded, rising with panic. Stop? We can't stop. We have deliveries to make, families waiting. I got a daughter's birthday party tomorrow afternoon, promised her I'd be home. We just need to find the exit. Leonard tried again, explaining what he'd learned about Midwest transport, about the decades that had passed. But the radio went dead mid-sentence, cutting off his words. He never saw the convoy again that night. The highway remained empty as he continued west, crossing into Wyoming just before dawn. But Leonard couldn't shake the encounter. He reported it to other drivers at truck stops, describing what he'd witnessed. Most laughed it off. A few nodded knowingly, sharing their own stories of phantom vehicles on lonely roads. An elderly driver in Rock Springs told him about the loop, a phenomenon where traumatic events imprint themselves on locations, replaying endlessly for those sensitive enough to perceive them. "Those boys are stuck," the old man said, "driving the same stretch forever, looking for an exit that don't exist in their time. You didn't see them. You saw their echo." Leonard tried to move on, accepting other routes, other hauls, but he couldn't forget those voices. Desperate, confused, trapped in a temporal loop they didn't understand. He researched the missing drivers, found their names in archived newspaper articles. Robert Mallory, age 34, married with 2 daughters. James Patterson, age 41, veteran Purple Heart recipient. Charles Webb, age 28, newly engaged. Frank Morrison, age 52, 20 years with Midwest Transport. Thomas Reardon, age 38, 3 sons. Vincent Cruz, age 45, planning retirement. 6 men who'd vanished without explanation, leaving families that never got closure. Leonard began avoiding that stretch of I-80, taking southern routes through Colorado instead. But on the anniversary of their disappearance, August 12th, he felt compelled to return. He drove westbound at the exact time the convoy had departed North Platte in 1967, hoping to make contact again. At mile marker 260, the phantom exit ramp appeared precisely as before. This time, Leonard took it. His truck descended the impossible ramp onto a road that shimmered at the edges, as if reality were struggling to maintain its structure. The pavement was older here, narrower, marked with painted lines that hadn't been used since the 1960s. He drove for 10 miles, following the phantom, rode through grasslands that looked subtly wrong. The stars too bright, the air too still. Then he saw them. 6 trucks parked at a rest area that shouldn't exist, drivers standing beside their rigs smoking cigarettes and consulting paper maps. Leonard pulled in slowly, his modern Kenworth an anachronism among their vintage Macs and Peterbilts. The drivers turned to stare at him, faces flickering like old film footage. Robert Mallory approached, the same gravelly voice from the CB. "You came back." Leonard nodded, unsure what to say. "We've been waiting," Mallory continued. "Figured you might show up again. You seem to understand what happened to us." Leonard explained everything he knew, the date, the decades that had passed, the families they'd left behind. The 6 drivers listened in stunned silence. When he finished, Mallory looked at his companions, then back at Leonard. "We felt it, you know. Felt something wrong that night. The highway changed under our wheels. We tried to stop, tried to turn back, but we couldn't find the way, just kept driving, seeing the same signs, passing the same mile markers." He gestured at the impossible rest area. "This is our loop. We stop here, rest, then get back on the road, hoping this time we'll find home, but it never happens." Leonard asked what he could do to help. Mallory smiled sadly. "Tell them we're sorry. Our families, if any, are still alive. Tell them we tried to come home." Leonard woke up in his truck at dawn, parked on the shoulder of I-80 near mile marker 260. He had no memory of leaving the phantom rest area or returning to the highway. But on his passenger seat lay 6 chrome mud flaps, each engraved with a name: Mallory, Patterson, Webb, Morrison, Reardon, Cruz. He kept his promise. Over the following months, he tracked down surviving family members, children now elderly, spouses remarried or passed away. He delivered the mud flaps and told sanitized versions of his encounter, omitting the supernatural elements but confirming that their loved ones had thought of them at the end. Leonard never drove through Nebraska again. The Phantom convoy continued its eternal journey, and sometimes, late at night, drivers on I-80 report seeing 6 trucks traveling in perfect formation, taillights dim as dying stars, forever searching for an exit that exists in memory but not in space, trapped between the highway and eternity, delivering cargo that will never arrive, chasing a home that recedes with every mile. Story 5. The Voice in the Static. Denise Parker had been a long-haul trucker for 14 years, primarily running routes through the Pacific Northwest. By November of 2023, she'd become accustomed to the isolation that came with night driving through mountain passes and dense forest. Her International ProStar was equipped with every modern convenience: satellite radio, GPS navigation, hands-free communication systems. But Denise preferred her old CB radio, a relic from her training days that still functioned perfectly. She appreciated the CB's simplicity and the camaraderie it fostered among drivers who shared the lonely hours. But that preference nearly cost her sanity when she encountered the voice in the static on a fog-bound night near Mount Rainier. The evening started normally enough. Denise had picked up a load of processed timber in Eugene, Oregon, destined for a distribution center near Tacoma, Washington. The route was familiar: Interstate 5 north through Portland, then continuing into Washington. She departed Eugene just before 7 p.m., expecting to reach Tacoma by 3 a.m. The weather forecast predicted light rain and fog in the mountain passes, nothing unusual for November in the Cascades. Denise settled into her rhythm, listening to CB chatter about traffic conditions and weather updates. Drivers warned about heavy fog near Kelso, black ice on the Cowlitz grades, and a jackknife trailer blocking one lane near Castle Rock. By 10 p.m., she'd crossed into Washington and was climbing into the foothills. The fog thickened dramatically, reducing visibility to perhaps 50 feet. Her headlights created tunnels of swirling gray vapor. Denise downshifted, slowing to 40 miles per hour. The CB chatter continued, voices crackling through static as drivers navigated the same conditions. She listened to their updates, mentally mapping the road ahead. Then at 10:47 p.m., a new voice broke through the chatter. A woman's voice, young and frightened, barely audible beneath waves of static. "Help! Please, anyone, help!" Denise grabbed her mic immediately. "This is northbound International on I-5 at mile marker 82. I copy your distress call. What's your location and situation?" The static surged, nearly drowning out the response. "Don't know where, fog everywhere, can't see, road disappeared." Denise's heart rate quickened. The voice sounded genuinely terrified, not the usual CB prank or bored driver looking for entertainment. "Ma'am, are you in a vehicle? Can you describe your surroundings?" More static then. "Truck went off. In the trees. So cold. Please hurry." Denise checked her mirrors and prepared to pull over to call for emergency services. But the voice continued, and something about it made her hesitate. "Been here so long. Nobody comes. Can you see my lights?" Denise scanned the fog-shrouded forest on both sides of the highway. No lights visible except the faint glow of her own taillights reflecting off the fog. "Negative. I don't see any lights. Can you activate your hazards or horn?" The response came after a long pause, distorted and echoing. "Did that hours ago, battery dying, please." Denise pulled onto the shoulder, activated her hazards, and grabbed her phone to call 911. But as she dialed, the voice interrupted. No police. They won't find me. You have to come, follow my voice. Something about that statement sent chills through Denise's body. How could she follow a voice through CB static? How would that help locate someone? She completed her 911 call anyway, reporting a possible stranded motorist near mile marker 82. The dispatcher took her information but seemed skeptical. There were no reports of accidents or missing vehicles in that area. Denise provided her contact information and promised to continue monitoring her CB. After ending the call, she keyed her mic again. "Help is on the way. Stay calm and keep talking so I can maintain contact." The voice responded immediately, stronger now, more urgent. "You have to come yourself. They won't find me. Nobody finds me. You're different. You can hear me." Denise felt her unease deepen. The phrasing was strange, the emphasis wrong. She'd dealt with panicked people before, accident victims, stranded motorists, and this didn't sound like normal panic. This sounded like something else, something she couldn't quite identify. She tried a different approach. "What's your name? How long have you been stranded?" The static cleared for a moment and the voice came through perfectly clear. "Sarah Mitchell. I've been here since November 15th, 2009. Please, you have to help me. I'm so cold." 2009. 14 years ago. Denise's hands began to tremble. This had to be a sick joke, someone playing with old recordings or mimicking a historical incident. She grabbed her phone and searched for Sarah Mitchell truck accident, Washington, 2009. The results made her stomach drop. Sarah Mitchell, age 26, had vanished on November 15th, 2009 while driving alone from Eugene to Seattle. Her pickup truck had disappeared somewhere along Interstate 5. Despite extensive searches, neither Sarah nor her vehicle was ever found. The case remained open, classified as a missing person with suspected foul play. Denise stared at her CB radio, watching the channel indicator flicker as the voice continued to plead. "Can you see me yet? I'm waving. My truck's blue, in the trees." This wasn't possible. This was a recording, a cruel hoax, maybe some hacker playing with CB frequencies. But the desperation in that voice felt genuine, the fear palpable even through static and distance. Denise made a decision that defied logic. She grabbed her high-powered flashlight, locked her truck, and walked to the edge of the shoulder. The fog pressed against her like wet cotton. She could barely see 10 feet into the forest. She aimed her flashlight beam into the trees, sweeping slowly back and forth. Nothing but Douglas firs, sword ferns, and drifting fog. She walked north along the shoulder, continuing to scan the forest. Her CB radio, still clipped to her belt, crackled. "You're close. I can hear your footsteps. Please hurry." Denise stopped, breathing hard. She couldn't hear anyone in the forest, just the distant hum of highway traffic and the drip of condensation from tree branches. She keyed her radio. "Sarah, if you can hear me, I need you to make noise. Bang on your vehicle, honk your horn, anything." Silence followed, then a sound that made Denise's blood freeze. A car horn, distant and muffled, coming from deep in the forest south of her position. She ran back along the shoulder, flashlight bouncing wildly. The horn sounded again, 3 short blasts, maybe 200 yards into the trees. Denise found a gap in the guardrail where erosion had created a natural path down the embankment. She descended carefully, boots slipping on wet leaves. The horn sounded a third time, closer now. Her flashlight beam caught something metallic through the fog, a vehicle's side mirror reflecting her light. She pushed through salal bushes and low-hanging branches until she reached it. A blue Toyota Tacoma covered in moss and decaying vegetation sat wedged between 2 large firs. The truck had clearly been there for years, not hours. Rust consumed the body panels. The windshield was cracked and opaque with algae, but the horn honked again, 3 short blasts from inside the abandoned vehicle. Denise approached slowly, heart hammering. She wiped condensation from the driver's side window and looked inside. The cab was empty, seats rotted away to springs and fabric scraps. No body, no belongings, just decay and forest detritus. Yet the horn sounded again, impossible and insistent. Her CB radio crackled. "You found me, thank God. Can you open the door?" Denise's hand reached for the door handle, then stopped. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to climb back to the highway, to drive away and never look back. But the voice persisted, pleading, desperate. "Please, I'm so cold. Let me out." Denise yanked her hand back. "Sarah, there's nobody in this truck. It's been abandoned for years." The voice changed then, losing its frightened quality, becoming something else, angry, accusatory. "You're lying. I'm right here. Why won't you help me?" Static surged, overwhelming the channel. Then the voice multiplied, dozens of voices overlapping. "Help us. We're all here, i.e. stuck here. Nobody helps. Why won't you help?" Denise stumbled backward, nearly falling. The truck's horn began blaring continuously, an impossible sound from a vehicle with no battery. All around her, the fog filled with voices, men, women, children, all begging for help, all claiming to be stranded, all describing accidents and disappearances spanning decades. She ran. Branches tore at her jacket. Roots grabbed her boots. Behind her, the voices followed, carrying through the fog like physical entities. "Don't leave us. Come back. You can hear us. You're special." Denise reached the embankment and scrambled up, using roots and rocks for purchase. She reached the highway shoulder, gasping for breath, covered in mud and pine needles. Her truck sat undisturbed 50 yards north. She sprinted to it, climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and sat trembling. Her CB radio, still clipped to her belt, went silent. She unclipped it, stared at the device, then made a choice. She threw it out the window, watched it shatter on the pavement. Denise drove to Tacoma without stopping, delivered her load, and immediately headed to a dealership in Seattle. She traded in her truck for a newer model, one without CB radio installation. She equipped it with only satellite communication and cell phone systems. But the voices found her anyway. Sometimes late at night, when she was alone on empty highways, her truck's radio would activate on its own. Not the CB, the AM/FM radio, sometimes even the satellite channels. And always, beneath the music or talk shows, she could hear them. Whispers, pleas, names and dates of missing drivers, vanished travelers, all the people who disappeared along America's highways and never been found. Denise learned to drive with no radio at all, preferring silence. She refused routes through the Pacific Northwest, taking southern corridors and Midwest runs instead. But distance didn't matter. The voices reached her in Arizona deserts, Kansas plains, Texas panhandles. They weren't bound by geography, they were bound to her, the driver who'd finally heard them but refused to help. She consulted specialists, audio engineers, paranormal investigators, even a psychiatrist who suggested auditory hallucinations brought on by isolation. Nothing explained the consistency of the voices or the verifiable information they provided. One voice claimed to be Michael Reynolds, missing since 1983 near Barstow, California. Denise researched the name and found a cold case matching that description perfectly. Another voice identified herself as Linda Chen, disappeared in 1991 outside Albuquerque. Again, the details checked out. The voices were real or represented real missing people, somehow communicating through radio frequencies from wherever they'd gone. Denise tried helping once more, reporting every name and location the voices provided to law enforcement. But investigators found nothing at the locations described. No bodies, no evidence, no closure. The voices only grew more insistent, angry that she'd promised help but delivered none. They cursed her, blamed her, called her a liar. "You can hear us, but you won't help. You're like all the others, driving past our graves, ignoring our screams." By March of 2024, Denise had stopped sleeping. The voices invaded her dreams, turning them into nightmares of endless highways filled with reaching hands and pleading faces. She checked herself into a hotel in Omaha, desperate for rest. But the voices came through the alarm clock, the television, even the vibrations of her phone. They were everywhere, carried on electromagnetic waves, speaking simultaneously in a cacophony of need and rage. She tried to explain to hotel staff, to other drivers, to anyone who would listen. But words failed to convey the horror of being a receiver for the lost, a conduit for voices that refused to be silenced. In June, Denise drove her truck to a remote location in Montana, parked it in a dense forest far from any highway, and walked away. She left no note, took only a backpack with water and basic supplies. Hikers found the truck 3 weeks later, engine cold, doors unlocked, logbook open to a page filled with names and dates, dozens of missing persons spanning 4 decades. At the bottom of the page, in Denise's handwriting, was a final message. "I can't be their radio anymore. If you can hear them, you're next. Destroy all receivers. Don't listen. They'll never let you go." The truck was towed, eventually auctioned, purchased by a small transport company in Idaho. The new driver reported strange CB transmissions on his second trip. Voices asking for help, claiming to be lost. He ignored them, assuming interference or pranks. But the voices persisted night after night until he too began researching the names they provided. The cycle continued. And somewhere in Montana's wilderness, Denise Parker walks roads only she can see, following voices only she can hear, searching for missing people in a landscape between the living world and wherever the lost voices call home, trapped forever in the static. Story 6. The Roadside Apparition. Gregory Thornton had been driving commercial vehicles for 22 years, longer than some of his fellow drivers had been alive. By March of 2024, he'd accumulated over 2 million miles without a single accident, earning him recognition and bonuses from his company. His Freightliner Cascadia was meticulously maintained, and Gregory took pride in his professional reputation. He specialized in southern routes, Texas to Florida, Atlanta to New Orleans, the sun-baked corridors where heat shimmered on asphalt and rest stops sold sweet tea by the gallon. But his perfect record and rational worldview shattered on a humid night near Baton Rouge, when he encountered the roadside apparition that defied every law of physics and reason. The incident occurred on March 23rd, a Friday night heavy with approaching thunderstorms. Gregory was hauling automotive parts from Houston to Jacksonville, running Interstate 10 through Louisiana's flat bayou country. He'd driven this route dozens of times, knew every exit and truck stop. The weather forecast predicted severe storms after midnight, so Gregory pushed his schedule, hoping to reach the Alabama border before the worst hit. By 11 p.m., he was east of Baton Rouge, the night alive with heat lightning that flickered across the southern horizon. His headlights cut through darkness punctuated by occasional swamp reflections and the distant glow of refineries. Traffic was moderate, mostly other commercial vehicles making their overnight runs. Gregory maintained steady speed, cruise control set at 68 miles per hour. His CB radio carried sporadic chatter, drivers warning about construction near Lafayette and discussing the incoming storm system. At 11:34 p.m., near mile marker 173, Gregory saw her. A woman stood on the shoulder, illuminated briefly by his headlights. She wore a white dress, practical but old-fashioned, and held a small suitcase. Her thumb was extended in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. Gregory's foot moved instinctively toward the brake, then stopped. He never picked up hitchhikers. Company policy strictly forbade it, and common sense reinforced that rule. But as his truck passed her, their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Her expression wasn't desperate or threatening, just patient, expectant, as if she'd been waiting specifically for him. Gregory glanced in his side mirror, expecting to see her receding into darkness. Instead, she was gone, completely vanished. The shoulder was empty, just asphalt and grass disappearing into bayou darkness. Gregory felt a chill despite the humid night air. He keyed his CB mic. "Anyone see a hitchhiker back at mile marker 173? A voice responded immediately, another driver heading eastbound. "Negative. Shoulder's been clear for miles." Gregory frowned, checking his mirror again. Nothing. He drove another 5 miles, rationality reasserting itself. A trick of light, fatigue making him see things. The heat lightning was creating strange shadows. He'd probably seen a reflective sign or mile marker, and his tired brain had constructed a human figure. But then she appeared again. This time she stood directly ahead in the middle of his lane, perhaps 200 yards distant, perfectly still, suitcase at her side. Gregory's heart leaped. He slammed the brakes, felt the trailer jackknife slightly as anti-lock systems engaged. The rig slowed rapidly, air brakes screaming, but when his headlights reached the spot where she'd stood, there was nothing. Empty highway, no obstruction, no body, no sign anyone had ever been there. Gregory sat with the engine idling, hands shaking on the steering wheel. This wasn't imagination. He'd seen her clearly, medium height, dark hair pulled back, that white dress, the small leather suitcase, but she'd vanished like smoke. He grabbed his phone to call dispatch, then hesitated. Report what? That he'd seen a ghost? That he'd nearly wrecked avoiding an apparition? They'd pull him off the road, demand a drug test, possibly terminate him for hallucinating. Gregory resumed driving, but slower now, eyes scanning constantly. 5 minutes later, she appeared in his passenger mirror, sitting in the grass beside the highway, watching his truck pass. He spun his head to look directly. Nobody there. The apparitions continued for the next 30 miles. She appeared in different locations, standing beside guardrails, walking along the fog line, sitting on defunct mile markers. Always the same white dress, same suitcase, same patient expression. Gregory tried ignoring her, focusing rigidly on the road ahead. But peripheral vision betrayed him. She was always there, just at the edge of awareness, paralleling his route. At mile marker 210, Gregory broke. He pulled into a rest area, parked in a lit section near other trucks, and sat breathing heavily. This couldn't be real. This had to be exhaustion, stress, maybe carbon monoxide poisoning from a trailer leak. He climbed out, inspected his rig, found nothing wrong. As he walked back to the cab, he saw her standing under a light pole 30 feet away, completely solid and three-dimensional. Other truckers walked past her without reacting, as if she didn't exist. Gregory approached slowly. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She turned to face him, and for the first time she spoke. Her voice was clear, accent slightly old-fashioned, like recordings from the 1950s. "I've been waiting for someone who could see me. You're the first in such a long time." Gregory felt his reality fracturing. "See you? What are you talking about?" She smiled sadly. "Most people just drive past. They can't perceive me anymore, but you did. You saw me back there and you almost stopped." Gregory wanted to run, to get back in his truck and drive until Louisiana was far behind him. But something in her expression held him. Not threat, but profound loneliness. "Who are you?" he asked. She gestured to a nearby picnic table. "My name was Catherine Broussard. I died on this highway in 1956. I've been trying to get home ever since." Gregory sat, legs weak. Catherine sat across from him, suitcase placed carefully beside her. "I was hitchhiking from Baton Rouge to Mobile. My mother was ill. A truck driver picked me up near sunset. He seemed kind at first." Her expression darkened. "He wasn't. He drove me to a remote area and I fought. He struck me, pushed me from the moving truck. I hit my head on the pavement. He left me there, dying in the darkness." Gregory listened, horrified. They never caught him? Catherine shook her head. Nobody even knew to look. I was just another young woman who disappeared. My mother died without knowing what happened to me. My body wasn't found for weeks, and by then animals had scattered the remains. I was buried as Jane Doe in a pauper's cemetery in Iberville Parish. She looked at Gregory with ancient, tired eyes. I've been trying to complete my journey ever since. To reach Mobile, to let my family know I tried to come home. But I can't leave this stretch of highway. I'm bound here, to the place where I died. Gregory's rational mind screamed that this was impossible, but he was sitting across from a woman who died 68 years ago, having a conversation that felt more real than anything in his recent memory. What do you want from me? Catherine's expression brightened slightly. Help me reach Mobile. Let me ride with you, just to the Alabama border. Maybe if I can cross that line, I can finally rest. Every instinct told Gregory to refuse to walk away, to treat this as the hallucination it must be. But he found himself nodding. Okay, if that's what you need. Catherine stood, picked up her suitcase, and walked toward his truck. Gregory followed, feeling like he was moving through a dream. She climbed into the passenger seat as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Gregory started the engine, pulled back onto I-10, and drove east with a ghost for a companion. For the first 20 miles, neither spoke. Catherine stared out the window at the passing darkness, watching the landscape that had changed so dramatically since her death. Then she began talking, telling Gregory about her life. She'd been 23, working as a seamstress in Baton Rouge, engaged to a sailor stationed in Mobile. Her mother's illness had prompted the desperate hitchhiking trip. She described a world without interstate highways when these roads were narrow, 2 lanes cutting through endless swamp. She spoke of big bands on the radio, letters that took weeks to deliver, a slower existence that seemed impossibly distant to Gregory's modern experience. As they approached the Mississippi border, Catherine grew more animated, excited. I can feel it. I'm farther from my death place than I've been in 68 years. It's working. But crossing into Mississippi changed nothing. She remained solid, present, still trapped. Her excitement faded into disappointment. I thought maybe... Her voice trailed off. Gregory felt unexpected sympathy. We'll keep going. Maybe Alabama will be different. They drove through Mississippi in the pre-dawn hours, the storm finally breaking with torrential rain. Catherine watched the lightning with childlike wonder. I haven't seen rain in so long. I mean, I see it, but I can't feel it. I can't feel anything, temperature, pain, hunger, just this endless, empty existence. By 5 a.m. they reached Mobile. Catherine directed Gregory to an old neighborhood near the bay, streets lined with live oaks and Victorian houses. My mother's house was here, number 247. They found the address, now occupied by a completely different structure, a modern split level that bore no resemblance to Catherine's descriptions. She stared at it, tears streaming down translucent cheeks. It's gone. Everything's gone. Even if I could knock on that door, nobody would know me. Gregory felt profound sadness for this woman trapped between existence and oblivion. I'm sorry, he said. I thought getting you here would help. Catherine wiped her face, composed herself. You tried. That's more than anyone has done in 68 years, thank you. She opened the passenger door, stepped down onto the Mobile street, and looked back at Gregory. You have a gift, being able to see us, the ones who got lost along the highways. There are thousands like me stuck at the places where we died, trying to finish interrupted journeys. Most people drive past without ever knowing we're there. But you see, that makes you special and cursed. She picked up her suitcase. Drive carefully, Gregory Thornton, and maybe don't look too carefully at the roadsides. Some of us are better left unseen." She walked away, white dress glowing in the early light, and faded gradually until she'd vanished completely. Gregory sat in his truck watching the spot where she'd disappeared, wondering if he'd experienced genuine supernatural contact or elaborate hallucination. He completed his delivery, filed his logs, and said nothing to dispatch about his passenger. But Catherine's words haunted him. Thousands of spirits trapped along America's highways, endlessly trying to complete journeys death had interrupted. And he could see them. As weeks passed, Gregory realized she was right. He began noticing others, faint figures by roadsides, faces in his mirrors that vanished when examined directly. Shadows that moved with purpose but cast no form. Most he ignored, following Catherine's advice. But occasionally, when he saw someone who looked particularly lost or desperate, he'd pull over. Sometimes they'd climb into his cab, tell their stories, seek his help reaching destinations they'd never achieved in life. Gregory became an unwilling ferry for the dead, transporting ghosts across state lines and county borders, hoping each time that crossing some invisible threshold would free them. It never did. They remained trapped, bound to highways by violent deaths or tragic accidents, unable to move forward or back. Gregory's logbooks began filling with notations only he understood, times he'd stopped for passengers nobody else could see, destinations that existed only in memory and ghost time. By October of 2024, Gregory's reputation changed. Other drivers noticed his odd behavior. Unnecessary stops, conversations with empty passenger seats, routes that deviated slightly to visit locations with no business purpose. Dispatch questioned his efficiency. His family worried about his mental state. But Gregory continued his unofficial duty, helping spirits find temporary peace even when permanent rest eluded them. He never saw Catherine again, though sometimes, driving through Louisiana near mile marker 173, he'd glimpse a woman in white standing patiently on the shoulder, suitcase at her side, waiting for the next driver blessed or cursed with the ability to see beyond the veil of normal perception, hoping that someday, somehow, she might finally complete her journey home and find the rest that death should have granted 68 years ago. Story 7. The Infinite Truck Stop. Raymond Foster had been in the trucking business for 19 years, building a career defined by efficiency and attention to detail. By August of 2023, he'd memorized every major truck stop chain between Toronto and Texas, knew which had the best coffee, which offered reliable mechanics, and which to avoid after dark. His Volvo VNL 760 was his office and home, equipped with satellite Wi-Fi, microwave, and a small refrigerator. Raymond prided himself on planning. He calculated fuel stops to the 10th of a mile, scheduled breaks to maximize DOT compliance, and never deviated from his optimal routes. But that rigid adherence to planning couldn't prepare him for the night he discovered the infinite truck stop on a desolate stretch of Kansas highway. It happened on August 17th, during a run from Minneapolis to Dallas. Raymond had departed Minnesota at 2 p.m., planning to reach Wichita by midnight for a scheduled rest period. The route was straightforward, I-35 south through Iowa, Missouri, and into Kansas, a corridor he'd driven dozens of times. By 10 p.m., he was making excellent time, cruising through the Kansas Flint Hills under a clear sky crowded with stars. His fuel gauge showed 3/8 of a tank, enough to reach his planned stop in Wichita, but uncomfortably close to empty if he encountered delays. As he passed Emporia, Raymond noticed his GPS acting strangely. The screen flickered, showing his position jumping erratically between locations miles apart. He tapped it, assuming a satellite glitch. The screen stabilized but now displayed an alert. Next services, 3 miles, Flying J Travel Center. Raymond frowned. He knew this stretch well. No Flying J existed between Emporia and Wichita. The next major truck stop was 70 miles south, but as he crested the next hill, he saw it. A massive travel center complex sprawling beside the highway, illuminated by sodium vapor lights that turned the night orange. Dozens of big rigs filled the parking lot. A restaurant glowed with neon signs, and fuel pumps stood in perfect rows. Raymond felt confusion mixed with relief. When had this facility opened? He must have missed the announcement. Regardless, his fuel situation made stopping prudent. He took the exit, pulling into the complex. Everything looked normal at first glance. Standard truck stop architecture, familiar logos, clean pavement. But as Raymond pulled toward the fuel islands, he noticed oddities. The other trucks in the lot were stationary, no drivers visible, no movement around them. The restaurant showed people inside, but they sat motionless like mannequins arranged at tables. The fuel pumps displayed prices that seemed slightly wrong. $2.47 per gallon for diesel, far below current market rates. Raymond pulled up to pump number 7, killed his engine, and climbed down. The night air felt strange, too still, too quiet, despite the supposed activity of a busy truck stop. He swiped his fuel card at the pump. The reader beeped, screen displaying, "Please see attendant." Raymond looked toward the store, seeing fluorescent lights but no clear view of anyone inside. He walked across the parking lot, noticing more strangeness. The parked trucks bore company logos he didn't recognize. Some looked dated, corporate branding from EASO, the 1990s or early 2000s. One truck had a call 1-800-DIAL-ME painted on its side, the format archaic. Raymond pushed open the glass door to the store, bells jingling. The interior was impeccably clean, shelves fully stocked, coolers humming. But nobody stood at the counter. "Hello?" Raymond called. "I need to prepay for fuel." Silence answered him. He walked deeper into the store, past aisles of snacks and truck supplies. The restaurant section opened to his right. A classic diner setup with booths, counter seating, and a kitchen visible beyond swinging doors. People sat in the booths as he'd seen from outside. But as Raymond approached, his skin prickled. The diners weren't moving at all. They sat frozen mid-conversation, mid-bite, coffee cups raised but never reaching lips. Their eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. Raymond backed away, heart pounding. This was wrong, very wrong. He turned to leave and nearly collided with a man standing behind him. The man wore a Flying J uniform, name tag reading manager. His smile was pleasant but somehow empty. "Can I help you, sir?" the manager asked, voice perfectly modulated. I need fuel," Raymond stammered. "My card wouldn't read at the pump." The manager's smile never wavered. "Of course. Pump number 7, correct? I'll activate it manually. How much fuel do you need?" Raymond calculated quickly. "Fill the tanks, both sides." The manager nodded. "That will take approximately 11 minutes. Feel free to browse while you wait. We have everything a driver could need." Raymond watched the manager walk behind the counter and tap at an ancient computer terminal. The pump outside presumably activated, but Raymond couldn't shake his unease. He walked back outside, intending to monitor his fuel. But the parking lot had changed. More trucks filled the spaces, though he hadn't seen any arrive. And the building itself seemed larger, sprawling farther than he remembered, additional wings extending into darkness. Raymond hurried to his truck, climbed in, and started the engine while fuel flowed. His phone showed no signal. His CB radio produced only static. His GPS was frozen, still displaying the same Flying J Travel Center alert. Panic rose in his chest. Something was fundamentally wrong with this place. As fuel neared completion, Raymond made a decision. He'd take what he'd pumped and leave immediately, forget about paying if necessary. But when he tried to stop fueling manually, the pump wouldn't shut off. It continued flowing past his tank's capacity, diesel spilling onto the ground. Raymond ran to the nozzle, squeezed the handle to release the trigger lock. It wouldn't budge. Fuel poured endlessly, pooling around his tires. He sprinted to the store. The manager stood at the counter, same empty smile. "There's a problem with pump 7, Raymond shouted. "It won't stop." The manager tilted his head. "The pump will stop when you've received the fuel you need." "I don't need more. The tanks are full." The manager's smile widened slightly. "Not those tanks, the others." "What others? I don't have other tanks." The manager pointed toward the restaurant. "Perhaps you should eat while you wait. Our food is quite good, everyone says so." Raymond looked at the frozen diners, dread settling over him like a physical weight. Those weren't statues or mannequins, those were drivers who'd stopped here, who'd gotten trapped somehow, locked into this impossible place. He was about to join them unless he escaped immediately. Raymond ran from the store back to his truck. The fuel pool had spread dramatically, diesel covering half the parking lot. But his truck's tanks weren't overflowing. The fuel was disappearing somewhere. He climbed into the cab, threw the transmission into drive, and accelerated. The truck lurched forward, tearing the fuel nozzle from the pump. Alarms blared. The parking lot lights intensified, turning from orange to harsh white. Raymond didn't look back. He aimed for the exit, but the driveway had changed. Instead of rejoining the highway, it curved back toward the building, creating a loop. He tried another exit route, same result. Every path led back to the travel center, as if the place was folding space around itself. He drove faster, taking corners recklessly, trailer swaying dangerously. Behind him, the building seemed to grow, lights multiplying, the structure expanding to fill his mirrors. The frozen diners were standing now, pressing against the restaurant windows, staring at him with empty eyes. The manager stood in the parking lot, watching calmly as Raymond circled, his smile never fading. In desperation, Raymond aimed his truck at the perimeter fence, a simple chain-link barrier separating the parking lot from empty prairie. He accelerated hard, engine roaring. The truck smashed through the fence, posts snapping like twigs. He drove across open ground, bouncing violently over uneven terrain. Behind him, the truck stop's lights began to dim. He risked a glance in his mirror. The entire complex was fading, becoming translucent, then vanishing completely. Within seconds, nothing remained but empty darkness. Raymond reached a service road, followed it back to the highway, and merged onto I-35 southbound. His hands shook uncontrollably. His fuel gauge read 3/8 full, exactly what it had shown before he'd stopped. He drove to Wichita in silence, every mile marker a small victory. At his planned rest stop, a legitimate normal Flying J, Raymond parked and sat trembling in his cab for an hour before he could bring himself to enter. The place looked similar to the Phantom truck stop, but everything was normal. Real drivers walked around, conversations happened, staff moved behind the counter. Raymond bought coffee and sat in a booth, searching his phone for any mention of a Flying J near Emporia. Nothing existed at that location. No construction announcements, no grand openings, no evidence such a facility had ever been planned. He checked satellite maps. Empty highway, no structures, just prairie and sky. Over the following weeks, Raymond became obsessed with understanding what he'd experienced. He researched other drivers' stories, finding scattered reports of similar encounters. Truck stops that appeared suddenly, offered impossible services, then vanished without trace. One driver described a pilot station that sold fuel for 50 cents per gallon and had arcade games from the 1980s. Another mentioned a TA center where the restaurant served his grandmother's exact recipe for pot roast, despite her death 20 years earlier. And the fact he'd never told anyone about her cooking. These phantom stops appeared random, unpredictable, but always shared common elements. Frozen or strange occupants, architectural impossibilities, difficulty leaving, and complete absence from maps or records. Raymond tried avoiding that stretch of I-35, but work demands eventually forced his return. In October, hauling a load to Oklahoma City, he approached Emporia with extreme anxiety. The highway looked normal. No unexpected exits, no orange lights glowing in the darkness. He passed the location where the phantom stop had appeared without incident. Relief washed over him. Maybe it had been a one-time occurrence, a glitch in reality that had sealed itself. But 50 miles south, near the Kansas-Oklahoma border, his GPS flickered. An alert appeared. Next service is 2 miles, Love's travel stop. Raymond's blood went cold. He knew this stretch too. No Loves existed here. Cresting the next hill, he saw it. Another massive complex, different branding but same impossible presence. He gripped the steering wheel and accelerated, refusing to stop regardless of fuel level. As he passed the exit, he glimpsed the parking lot, full of trucks, frozen drivers visible through restaurant windows, a manager standing outside waving at him to pull in. Raymond pushed his speed to 75, then 80, watching in his mirror as the truck stop faded into non-existence. His fuel gauge dropped to 1/8 tank. He made it to a real travel stop across the Oklahoma border, running on fumes, his truck sputtering into the parking lot. After that night, Raymond developed a system. He never let his fuel drop below half tank. He stopped only at truck stops he'd personally visited before, confirmed through multiple sources. He carried printed maps and refused to rely solely on GPS. And most importantly, he never stopped at facilities that appeared unexpectedly, no matter how desperate his fuel situation. He warned other drivers through CB radio and trucking forums, though most dismissed his stories as fatigue-induced hallucinations. But a few contacted him privately, sharing their own encounters with impossible truck stops, places that existed between moments, feeding on stranded travelers, collecting drivers like specimens in some cosmic collection. Raymond learned that these phantom stops followed patterns. They appeared most frequently to drivers who were exhausted, low on fuel, or distracted. They offered exactly what the driver desperately needed: fuel, food, rest, but at a terrible price. Those who stayed too long became part of the place, frozen in time, their consciousness trapped in endless loops of mundane activity. The locations moved, never appearing in the same place twice, migrating along America's highway system like predatory organisms. Some drivers speculated they were pocket dimensions. Others believed they were elaborate simulations or psychological warfare experiments. Raymond had no answers, only survival strategies. By December of 2024, Raymond had documented 17 different phantom truck stops through his research. Different chains, different locations, but identical characteristics. He compiled a list, shared it with other drivers who believed. They formed an informal network, warning each other when new phantom stops appeared, but the phenomena seemed to be increasing in frequency. More drivers reported encounters, more GPS systems flickered with false alerts. More impossibilities materialized beside American highways. Raymond wondered if the phantom stops had always existed and drivers were only now recognizing them, or if something fundamental about reality was deteriorating along the nation's transportation corridors. He continued driving, more paranoid now, trusting nothing his instruments told him, second-guessing every exit. The infinite truck stop had taught him a terrible lesson. The roads he'd driven for 19 years, the familiar routes he'd memorized, couldn't be trusted. Somewhere in the spaces between mile markers and the gaps on maps existed places that shouldn't be. Feeding on exhaustion and desperation, collecting the unwary, growing larger with each driver who made the mistake of stopping. And Raymond knew with grim certainty that eventually his vigilance would fail. Eventually he'd be too tired, too low on fuel, too desperate. And when that moment came, he'd see the orange lights glowing in the darkness, the familiar logos promising safety and rest. and he'd pull in, despite knowing better, because the alternative would be running out of fuel in the middle of nowhere. And maybe that was the point, to make drivers choose between certain danger and probable impossibility, to turn America's highways into hunting grounds where the prey drove willingly into traps disguised as sanctuary, where every rest stop might be the last stop, and every refuel might fuel something far more sinister than an engine. Story 8. The Mirror Route. Antonio Garcia had spent 17 years hauling freight across the southwestern United States, specializing in overnight runs through desert corridors where most drivers avoided working. By June of 2024, he'd developed an efficient routine and preferred the solitude of empty highways. His Western Star 5700XE was equipped for extended solo trips, and Antonio had cultivated a meditative approach to driving. Minimal radio, no phone distractions, just road and starlight. But that peaceful existence shattered when he encountered the mirror route on what should have been a routine run from Phoenix to El Paso. The evening began normally. Antonio had loaded a shipment of construction materials in Phoenix, departing just before sunset. On June 14th, his route followed Interstate 10 east through Arizona and into New Mexico, a straight corridor he'd driven hundreds of times. The weather was clear, temperature dropping from daytime highs into comfortable evening warmth. Antonio settled into his rhythm, watching the Sonoran desert landscape transform under twilight. Saguaro cacti becoming dark silhouettes, mountains turning purple against the fading sky. By 10 p.m., he'd crossed into New Mexico, passing through Lordsburg. His GPS showed El Paso roughly 90 miles ahead, arrival estimated at midnight. At 10:42 p.m., near mile marker 68, Antonio's headlights caught something strange. The highway ahead split, not at a marked interchange, but simply divided, the road forking into two identical paths. Both routes looked exactly like Interstate 10. Same pavement quality, same lane markings, same reflective markers. No signs indicated which path to follow, no arrows directing traffic. Antonio slowed, confused. He'd never seen this fork before, and his GPS showed no such split. The device displayed his route as continuous single highway. Yet clearly the road diverged ahead. He chose the right fork, reasoning that most interstate traffic followed right paths when confused. His truck entered the right-hand highway, and the left fork disappeared behind him. For the next 10 miles, everything appeared normal. The highway rolled through desert landscape, mile markers advancing sequentially. But then Antonio noticed something odd. The terrain on both sides looked increasingly familiar, not just in general appearance, but specifically. That particular rock formation, that exact arrangement of Joshua trees, that precise curve in the wash paralleling the highway. He'd seen them all before. Tonight, 20 miles back, he checked his GPS. It showed him progressing east normally, mile marker 78. But through his windshield, he was passing landscape that should be near mile marker 58. The mile marker signs confirmed his visual assessment. He was passing marker 58 again. Antonio's confusion deepened. He must have somehow turned around without realizing it, gotten turned westbound when he meant to go east. But that didn't make sense. He'd been driving straight. No exits taken, no U-turns possible. He checked his compass. He was definitely heading east. Yet the landscape and mile markers insisted he was repeating a stretch of highway he'd already driven. He continued, watching carefully. The mile markers advanced normally, 59, 60, 61, but the landscape continued to look wrong, too familiar, repeating patterns. At mile marker 68, he saw the fork again. The same impossible split, two identical paths diverging. This time, Antonio stopped on the shoulder before reaching the fork. He climbed out, walked forward on foot. The fork was real, visible, both paths solid and legitimate looking. He pulled out his phone, tried calling dispatch. No signal. He walked back to his truck, consulted his paper atlas. Interstate 10 showed as a single continuous highway. No forks, no splits, no alternative routes. He stood in the cooling desert air, trying to understand. Then, on the left fork, headlights appeared, a truck approaching from the distance. Relief flooded Antonio. Another driver could help, explain what was happening. The truck drew closer and Antonio felt ice form in his stomach. It was his truck. Same Western Star model, same company livery, same trailer configuration. As it passed under a highway light, he saw the driver's face, his own face staring forward, oblivious to Antonio standing on the shoulder. The duplicate truck took the right fork and continued east, exactly as Antonio had done 20 minutes earlier. Antonio stood frozen, mind reeling. He'd just watched himself drive past. The truck disappeared into darkness, taillights dwindling. Antonio ran to his own rig, climbed in, and made a split-second decision. This time, he'd take the left fork. Maybe that was the real route, the way out of this loop. He accelerated to the split and veered left. The highway stretched ahead, looking identical to the right fork, indistinguishable. Antonio drove faster now, pushing 75 miles per hour, desperate to break whatever pattern had trapped him. The mile markers advanced, 69, 70, 71, but the landscape remained wrong. And worse, he began seeing other trucks on this highway. They all traveled in the same direction, all maintained identical speeds, and all looked subtly wrong. Some bore company logos that didn't quite match reality. Familiar brands with slightly altered names or colors. Some were older models that should have been retired decades ago. One truck passed him and Antonio glimpsed the driver, a woman with an expression of blank terror, hands gripping the wheel so hard her knuckles were white. Their eyes met for a second and Antonio saw recognition. She knew something was wrong too, but couldn't stop driving. At mile marker 68, somehow he'd reached it again. The fork reappeared. This time, Antonio saw multiple versions of himself stopped on the shoulder. One stood beside a truck talking on a phone. Another walked toward the fork on foot. A third sat in his cab, head in hands. None of them noticed each other or the truck currently approaching. Antonio drove straight through without choosing either fork, aiming between them. His truck hit something. Not physical barrier, but resistance, like driving through viscous air. Reality rippled around him. For a moment, he saw dozens of overlapping highways, all occupying the same space. Interstate 10 repeated infinitely, each version slightly offset, all carrying duplicate trucks through duplicate landscapes. Then the multiplicity collapsed back into single vision, and Antonio found himself on what looked like normal highway again. But this version felt different. The landscape was flatter, more barren. The sky looked strange, stars too bright, arranged in unfamiliar patterns. His GPS had stopped functioning entirely, screen black. His fuel gauge showed 3/4 full, exactly what it had read when he'd first encountered the fork. His phone displayed the time as 10:42 p.m., the same time he'd entered the mirror route. No matter how long he'd been driving, no time had passed in the outside world. Antonio's understanding fractured. He wasn't just repeating a stretch of highway. He'd somehow fallen into a parallel version of the route, a mirror reality that looped endlessly, trapping drivers who chose the wrong fork. He tried multiple approaches to escape. He stopped and waited, hoping reality would reset. After an hour, he resumed driving and immediately saw the fork at mile marker 68 again. He tried reversing, heading westbound. The fork appeared behind him, forcing him to choose. He attempted off-roading, driving into the desert to bypass the highway entirely. But after 100 yards, his truck simply reappeared on the highway, approaching the fork as if he'd never left the road. Each attempt failed. Each time he ended at the same split, forced to choose. both choices leading back to the same impossible loop. Antonio began documenting everything, filming with his phone, recording his observations in his logbook. He saw hundreds of other trucks now, all trapped in the mirror route, all repeating the same patterns. He tried signaling them with his lights and horn. None responded. They drove like automatons, consciousness dulled or absent entirely. He wondered how long they'd been trapped. Days, years. Time had no meaning here. His own sense of duration became unreliable. Sometimes the drive between mile markers felt like minutes, sometimes hours. After what subjectively felt like days, Antonio noticed changes in himself. He felt less panicked, more resigned. The repetition was wearing down his urgency to escape. He began to understand how drivers became the blank-faced automatons he'd seen. Eventually, the loop dulled consciousness, turned active minds into passive observers going through motions endlessly. He fought against that fate, forcing himself to try new approaches to maintain awareness and resistance. At one rest period parked on the shoulder, he noticed something in his mirror. The landscape behind him was different, subtly but definitely. Rock formations stood in slightly different positions. Vegetation had altered. He watched carefully and the changes accelerated. The landscape was shifting, evolving, as if the mirror route was unstable, consuming and generating new versions of itself. Antonio had an idea. If the route was unstable and shifting, maybe he could catch it during a transition, slip between versions back to true reality. He watched his mirrors constantly, waiting for another shift. When it came, landscape blurring, mile markers flickering, he accelerated hard, pushing his truck to maximum speed. As reality wavered around him, he aimed his rig at the space between the shifting versions, trying to exploit the momentary gap. His truck shuddered, metal groaning. The windshield cracked. Alarms blared from his dashboard. Then, with a sensation like falling through ice, everything stabilized. Antonio found himself on Interstate 10 approaching Deming, New Mexico. The highway looked normal. Correct landmarks, proper traffic patterns, his GPS functioning and showing his position accurately. His clock read 11:47 p.m. June 14th, barely an hour after he'd first encountered the fork. He'd spent subjective days in the mirror route, but only an hour had passed in real time. He drove to El Paso in stunned silence, delivered his load and immediately requested time off. Dispatch granted it, noting his exhausted appearance. During his time off, Antonio researched obsessively. He found scattered reports of similar phenomena. Drivers who claimed to have experienced repeating highways, time loops, mirror routes that trapped them temporarily. Most were dismissed as hallucinations from fatigue, but Antonio knew better. He contacted a few of the reporting drivers. They compared experiences, finding troubling consistencies. The phenomena seemed concentrated in certain corridors, southwestern deserts, Great Plains stretches, isolated mountain highways. Always at night, always on lonely roads, always presenting impossible choices. One driver, a woman named Rachel who'd experienced a mirror route in Nevada, suggested these were thin places, locations where reality's fabric had worn down, allowing travelers to slip between parallel versions of highways. She theorized that America's road system, with millions of vehicles traveling identical routes billions of times, had created grooves in space-time. Most traffic stayed in the primary groove, but occasionally a driver would slip into a parallel groove, a mirror route running alongside the real highway but separate, looping back on itself. Antonio found the theory both compelling and terrifying. It suggested that thousands of mirror routes existed across America, invisible most of the time but capable of capturing unwary drivers. And worse, some drivers never escaped, remaining trapped in eternal loops, becoming the ghostly automaton trucks he'd witnessed. He wondered if those blank-faced drivers were experiencing their own subjective eternities. Consciousness trapped in vehicles that drove endlessly through mirror landscapes, never reaching destinations. Fuel never depleting, time never advancing. He returned to work but avoided that stretch of I-10 for months, taking longer southern routes. When work finally forced him back through New Mexico in December, he approached mile marker 68 with extreme anxiety. The highway looked normal. No fork, no split, just continuous road. He passed through without incident, relief overwhelming him. But 50 miles later, near mile marker 118, his headlights caught something ahead. The highway split into two identical paths. No signs, no warnings. Antonio's hands tightened on the wheel. The mirror route had moved, or new ones were appearing. He slowed, stopped, and sat staring at the impossible choice. This time, he called dispatch immediately, reporting a road hazard. He waited on the shoulder until daylight. When dawn broke, the fork was gone, just single highway stretching east. Antonio resumed driving, but knew the truth. The mirror routes were proliferating, spreading through the highway system like cracks in glass. Eventually, every driver would encounter one, and not all would find their way back to the true road. Story 9. The Way Station. Tyrone Mitchell had been hauling commercial freight for 16 years, specializing in hazardous materials that required advanced certifications and meticulous documentation. By April of 2024, he'd built a reputation for reliability and had never failed a DOT inspection. His Mac anthem was maintained to perfection, his logbooks impeccable, and his cargo always properly secured and documented. Tyrone took professional pride in passing through way stations and inspection points without delay or issue. But that confidence shattered on a humid night in southern Georgia when he encountered a way station that measured far more than weight. The incident began on April 9th during a run from Atlanta to Jacksonville. Tyrone had loaded a shipment of industrial chemicals, properly labeled hazmat placards displayed, shipping papers in perfect order. He departed Atlanta just after 8 p.m., planning to reach Jacksonville by 4 a.m. The route followed Interstate 75 south into Georgia's coastal plain, a corridor of pine forests and small towns. By 11 p.m., he was approaching the Valdosta area, making good time. His CB radio crackled with routine chatter. Drivers discussing traffic conditions, weather updates, complaints about fuel prices. The night was warm and sticky, typical for Georgia in early spring. At 11:34 p.m. near mile marker 29, Tyrone saw the electronic sign. All commercial vehicles must enter way station, 2 miles. He'd passed through this particular station dozens of times, never with issues. He moved into the right lane, slowing as he approached the inspection facility. But as his headlights illuminated the entrance, something felt wrong. The station looked different, older somehow. The buildings more weathered, the lighting dimmer. The electronic scales glowed with an odd greenish tint, rather than the usual white LED displays. Only one other truck was visible ahead, pulling onto the scales. Tyrone followed standard procedure, rolling slowly onto the scale platform. His truck settled, suspension compressing slightly. He waited for the green light that would signal acceptable weight and clearance to proceed. Instead, a red light flashed, accompanied by a buzzer. The electronic display showed a message, "Overweight. Report to office." Tyrone frowned. That couldn't be right. He'd weighed his load at the shipper. Total gross weight was 72,400 pounds, well under the 80,000-pound federal limit. He pulled forward into the parking area and walked to the inspection office, clipboard with shipping papers in hand. The office interior was stark and outdated. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting sickly yellow illumination. A metal desk sat in the center of the room. behind which sat an inspector, a middle-aged man wearing a uniform that looked authentically official yet somehow wrong. The patches and badges were correct, but the fabric seemed too stiff, too new, as if someone had created a costume from reference images. The inspector looked up as Tyrone entered, his expression neutral. "License and papers." Tyrone handed over his documents. The inspector examined them slowly, too slowly, spending minutes on each page. Finally, he looked up. "You're overweight, substantially overweight." "That's impossible," Tyrone protested. "I weighed at the shipper, 72.4, I have the ticket." He produced the weight certificate from Atlanta. The inspector glanced at it dismissively. "Our scales show different." He turned a desktop monitor toward Tyrone. The display showed Tyrone's truck on the scales, but the weight reading made his blood freeze. 147,000 pounds. Nearly double what should be possible. "Your scales are malfunctioning," Tyrone said. "There's no way." "Our scales don't malfunction," the inspector interrupted. "You're carrying excess weight, unauthorized cargo. We'll need to inspect your trailer." Tyrone followed the inspector outside, confusion mounting. Two more inspectors had appeared, both wearing identical uniforms, both with the same neutral expressions. They directed Tyrone to break the seal on his trailer and open the doors. He complied, key trembling slightly in his hands. The seal snapped, door latches released, and the trailer doors swung open. Inside, his cargo sat exactly as loaded, pallets of chemical drums properly strapped and secured. The inspectors climbed into the trailer with flashlights, examining everything. They spent 30 minutes inside, far longer than normal inspections required. When they emerged, the lead inspector held something in his gloved hand, a small metal object, irregularly shaped. "What's this?" he demanded. Tyrone looked closer. He'd never seen the object before. It resembled a lump of corroded metal, maybe lead or iron, pitted and ancient-looking. "I don't know. That's not part of my cargo." The inspector's expression remained neutral. "It was secured beneath your trailer floor, accessible through a false panel. Combined weight of these objects accounts for the excess tonnage." Tyrone felt reality tilting. "There's no false panel. My trailer doesn't have hidden compartments." The inspector gestured, and the other two dragged a pallet aside, revealing a section of floor that had been pried up. Beneath it, a hollow space contained dozens of similar metal objects, each weighing perhaps 50 pounds. "I didn't put those there," Tyrone insisted. "I don't know what they are or how they got there." The inspector consulted a handheld device that looked like no equipment Tyrone had seen in 16 years of DOT interactions. The device emitted soft clicks like a Geiger counter. "These objects are radiating," the inspector said. "Not ionizing radiation, but something else. Temporal distortion, spatial warping. You're trafficking in recovered artifacts." "Artifacts? What are you talking about?" The inspector's neutral expression finally changed, showing something like pity. "You picked up passengers, unwanted cargo, things that attach themselves to vehicles traveling certain routes. They're using you for transport." Tyrone backed away, heart pounding. "This is insane. I loaded chemicals in Atlanta, that's all I'm carrying." The inspector shook his head. "That's what you think you're carrying. But highways accumulate more than traffic. They collect lost things, forgotten things, things that exist between destinations. Sometimes those things need vehicles to move them. Your truck was selected." Tyrone tried to process this. "Selected by what?" The inspector didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "You have two options. We can confiscate your trailer, remove the artifacts, and you can continue with a citation for unknowing transport of prohibited materials. Or you can complete your delivery, artifacts and all, and accept what comes with that choice." "What comes with that choice?" Tyrone asked. The inspector's expression darkened. The artifacts want to reach Jacksonville. Something there calls to them. If you deliver them, they'll detach from your vehicle. But the destination isn't a warehouse or loading dock. It's a place between places. You'll have to find it, and finding it changes you. Tyrone looked at his trailer, at the impossible hidden cargo, at the inspectors who seemed increasingly unreal. I just want to complete my delivery and go home. The inspector nodded slowly. Then go. But understand, you're not just carrying chemicals now. You're carrying weight that exists in more than 3 dimensions. Drive carefully. Tyrone climbed back into his cab, mind reeling. He pulled out of the way station back onto Interstate 75. His mirrors showed the facility receding, then impossibly vanishing, as if it had never existed. He checked his GPS, looked for the way station's location. No facility appeared on the map at that position. He called dispatch on his phone, got voicemail. He tried other numbers, friends, family. All went to voicemail or didn't connect. He was alone on this highway with cargo that shouldn't exist, heading toward a destination he couldn't define. The drive to Jacksonville took hours that felt like days. The highway seemed longer than normal, mile markers advancing slowly. Other traffic disappeared entirely, no cars, no trucks, just Tyrone alone on empty interstate. The landscape outside his windows looked wrong, too dark, vegetation shapes distorted. His fuel gauge didn't move, frozen at half tank. His clock showed time passing, but sunrise never came. He drove through perpetual 3 a.m., the hour when reality is thinnest. His CB radio crackled occasionally with voices speaking languages he didn't recognize, or familiar languages saying things that made no sense. Coordinates, dates from centuries ago, names of places that didn't exist. Finally approaching Jacksonville, his GPS flickered and displayed new directions. Not to his scheduled delivery address, but to coordinates in an industrial area near the St. Johns River. Tyrone followed the directions through empty streets, past warehouses and shipping terminals until he reached a dead-end road facing the dark water. The GPS announced, "You have arrived." But nothing was here, just cracked pavement, rusted fencing, and the river flowing silently. Tyrone stopped, unsure what to do. Then he saw it, a shimmer in the air near the water's edge like heat distortion. As he watched, the shimmer solidified into a structure, a building that hadn't been there seconds before. It resembled a warehouse, but the architecture was wrong. Angles that didn't quite align, surfaces that seemed to recede further than physical space allowed. Doors stood open, interior darkness absolute. Tyrone felt the trailer shift behind him, weight redistributing. The hidden cargo was moving on its own, drawn toward that impossible building. He climbed from his cab and watched as the metal artifacts emerged from his trailer, floating through the air, drifting toward the structure like leaves on invisible currents. They disappeared into the darkness, dozens of them, until his trailer was empty of everything except his legitimate cargo. The building faded once the last artifact entered, shimmer dissolving, leaving only empty riverfront. Tyrone checked his trailer. The false floor panel had vanished, solid metal restored. His weight felt lighter, truck responding differently. He weighed himself at a legitimate truck scale near the delivery address. 72,400 pounds, exactly right. He completed his delivery as scheduled, signed papers, and departed Jacksonville as dawn finally broke. The world looked normal again. Traffic, sunrise, familiar landmarks. But Tyrone knew he'd been changed. He'd seen behind the curtain, glimpsed the infrastructure beneath the infrastructure, the network of impossible spaces that existed alongside normal highways. In the weeks following, Tyrone encountered more way stations that measured strange cargo. Sometimes his truck showed overweight with emotion, grief from accident sites he'd passed, anger from road rage incidents, fear from near misses. Other times the scales measured time, showing that he'd accumulated years driving in circles through temporal loops. Once the scales showed his weight in souls, fractional amounts representing the lives he'd affected by his presence on highways, the butterfly effect of his passage through shared spaces. Each measurement forced him to confront aspects of existence he'd never considered. The inspectors at these impossible way stations offered the same choice each time: remove the cargo and continue normally, or deliver it and change further. Tyrone always chose delivery. He became a courier for things that existed between spaces, transporting objects and concepts and temporal fragments that needed to move along America's roads but couldn't use normal logistics. His manifests listed chemicals and electronics and consumer goods. But hidden beneath his trailer carried fragments of discontinued highways, echoes of demolished truck stops, memories of drivers who died on the routes he traveled. He tried explaining to other drivers, but words failed. How could he describe weighing stations that measured metaphysical cargo? How could he convey the experience of delivering shipments to locations that existed only during specific moments, buildings that phased in and out of reality? Other drivers thought he'd lost his mind, started avoiding him at truck stops. Dispatch noticed his routes taking longer, his explanations for delays becoming increasingly strange. By August of 2024, Tyrone had quit his job, purchased his own truck, and started taking contracts from clients who understood what he'd become: a transporter for the liminal, a hauler of the impossible. His truck became a legend among those who knew. If you had cargo that couldn't exist, couldn't be explained, couldn't travel normal routes, you called Tyrone Mitchell. He'd take it, no questions asked, and deliver it to impossible destinations. He drove through way stations that measured consciousness, passed inspections that verified the authenticity of hauntings, carried weight that bent space-time around his trailer. And somewhere in Georgia, on Interstate 75 near mile marker 29, a way station appears occasionally to drivers traveling at exactly 11:34 p.m. Those who enter have their cargo measured by scales that weigh more than mass. Most choose to have the extra weight removed to continue their journeys ignorant of what rides beneath their trailers. But a few, like Tyrone, choose to carry the weight forward, to become bridges between the possible and impossible, to deliver cargo that exists in the margins of reality, forever changed by the knowledge that every highway carries more than traffic, that every truck hauls more than manifests declare, that the infrastructure we see is merely the surface of a deeper network transporting things beyond human comprehension through the endless night. Story 10, The Last Exit. Michelle Briggs had been driving long-haul routes for 13 years, building a career defined by independence and self-reliance. By September of 2024, she'd crossed every state in the continental U.S., seen every landscape America had to offer. Her Peterbilt 579 was her sanctuary, equipped with a comfortable sleeper, efficient climate control, and enough supplies to stay on the road for weeks. Michelle preferred solo runs through remote areas, finding peace in landscapes where civilization was just a distant glow. But that preference for isolation nearly proved fatal when she encountered the last exit on a remote Nevada highway, where the rules of geography and logic ceased to apply. The night began routinely enough. Michelle had picked up a mixed load in Reno, bound for Denver, a straightforward run across Nevada and into Utah, then across Colorado. She departed Reno just before sunset on September 23rd, the autumn air crisp and clear. Her route followed US 50 East, the famous loneliest road in America, a designation Michelle had always found appealing rather than ominous. She'd driven this corridor dozens of times, knew its rhythm, long empty stretches punctuated by tiny towns, vast basin and range landscape rolling to every horizon. By 10 p.m., she was deep into central Nevada, approaching the desolate stretch between Austin and Eureka. Traffic was non-existent. Michelle's headlights carved tunnels through darkness, illuminating sagebrush and empty highway. The stars overhead blazed with intensity possible only in true wilderness, the Milky Way a glowing river across the sky. Her CB radio was silent, no other drivers within range. Her phone showed no signal, normal for this area. She was alone in the most fundamental sense, a single human consciousness moving through vast emptiness. At 10:47 p.m. her fuel gauge caught her attention. She'd planned to refuel in Ely, still 90 miles distant, but the needle showed lower than expected. She must have miscalculated her consumption on the climbing grades. Michelle consulted her maps. The next services should be at least 50 miles ahead. But then her headlights illuminated a green exit sign. Services next right, fuel, food, lodging. She slowed, surprised. She didn't remember an exit here. But fuel was fuel, and running out in central Nevada's emptiness was genuinely dangerous. The exit ramp curved away from the highway, descending into a shallow valley. Michelle took it, watching for the expected gas station lights. The ramp continued longer than seemed reasonable, curving through increasingly rough terrain. The pavement quality deteriorated, cracks and potholes appearing. Michelle slowed, further concerned about her suspension. After 2 miles, the ramp finally ended at a T-intersection. A stop sign stood crookedly, bullet holes perforating the metal. Left or right, no directional signs, no indication which way led to services. Michelle chose right arbitrarily, following a narrow 2-lane road through terrain that looked increasingly wrong. The vegetation was strange, not typical Nevada sagebrush, but twisted, desiccated things that resembled trees stripped of bark and life. The sky seemed darker here, stars dimmed or obscured. After 5 miles, she spotted lights ahead, amber and weak, but definitely artificial. Relief washed over her. The lights belonged to a small settlement, perhaps a dozen buildings arranged along the roadside. A faded sign read, "Welcome to Persistence, population 87. Michelle had never heard of this town, but rural Nevada held countless near ghost towns barely clinging to existence. She pulled into what appeared to be a gas station, single pump island, ancient mechanical register visible through a grimy window. The building looked decades old, paint peeling, roof sagging. But the pump appeared functional, and Michelle needed fuel desperately. She climbed down, approached the pump. No card reader, just a mechanical dial showing price per gallon, 0.87. That was impossibly low, prices from the 1970s. The pump handle was cold, slick with something more viscous than gasoline residue. Michelle looked toward the building. A figure stood inside, silhouetted against dim interior light. She walked to the door, pushed it open. Bells jingled. The interior smelled of dust and something organic like decay. The figure behind the counter was an elderly woman, face creased with wrinkles so deep they formed canyons. Her eyes were clouded, possibly blind, but she tracked Michelle's movement precisely. "Fuel?" the woman asked, voice like dry leaves. "Yes, please, fill up." The woman nodded slowly. "That'll be $43. Michelle pulled out cash, placed it on the counter. The woman's hand, gnarled, fingers twisted, took the bills and made them disappear beneath the counter. "Pump's active. Take what you need." Michelle returned outside, began fueling. The gasoline smelled wrong, sharper than normal, with an acrid undertone. But it flowed into her tank steadily. While she waited, she examined the settlement more closely. The other buildings showed no lights, no signs of life. One structure appeared to be a diner, neon sign dead but still readable. Last Chance Cafe. Another was a motel, vacancy sign dark, curtains drawn over every window. The road continued through town, disappearing into darkness beyond. Michelle felt increasing unease. Something about this place was fundamentally wrong. The silence was too complete. No insect sounds, no wind, no ambient noise, just silence and those weak amber lights that seemed to absorb rather than illuminate. The pump clicked off, tank full. Michelle replaced the nozzle, eager to leave. But as she walked back to her truck, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. Her Peterbilt was covered in dust, thick coating as if it had sat stationary for weeks. The tires showed flat spots. Spiderwebs stretched from mirrors to door handles. She'd been inside for maybe 3 minutes, but her truck looked abandoned. She ran her hand across the hood. Dust came away in thick clumps. Her heart hammered. She climbed into the cab, turned the key. The engine cranked slowly, reluctantly, finally catching with a cough of black smoke. She threw it into gear and accelerated hard, desperate to escape persistence, but leaving proved impossible. The road through town simply ended half a mile past the gas station, terminating at a barrier of tumbled boulders blocking further progress. Michelle reversed, tried the other direction. Same result, road ending in impassable blockage. She tried side streets, all dead ends, terminating at barriers or simply fading into impassable terrain. Panic rose in her chest. She was trapped in this impossible town, surrounded by empty buildings and oppressive silence. She grabbed her CB mic, called for help. Static answered, thick and buzzing. She tried her phone, still no signal. Her GPS showed no position, just blank screen. Michelle forced herself to think logically. She'd entered via the road from the highway. That route must still exist. She drove back to the gas station where the road entered town. But now the road simply stopped, pavement ending abruptly at the town's edge as if severed with a blade. Beyond it, empty desert stretched into darkness. No exit ramp, no connection to US 50, nothing. Michelle stopped, breathing rapidly, mind struggling to process. She'd driven into this town on a road that no longer existed. She was trapped in a place that couldn't be escaped because the geography itself was impossible. She considered waiting until daylight, hoping visibility would reveal an exit she'd missed. She parked near the gas station, locked her doors, and sat in the dark cab. Hours passed, or seemed to. Her clock showed time advancing, but darkness never lifted. 11 p.m. became midnight, then 1 a.m., then 2, but the sky remained black as pitch. Dawn never came. Michelle realized with growing horror that time might pass here, but natural cycles didn't. This place existed outside normal temporal flow, trapped in perpetual night. As hours accumulated, Michelle noticed movement in the empty buildings. Lights flickered on briefly in the diner, revealing silhouettes moving inside. Curtains twitched in motel windows. Shadows passed between structures, human-shaped but wrong in their proportions and movements. The old woman from the gas station emerged, standing in her doorway, staring directly at Michelle's truck. Other figures joined her, gaunt men in ancient clothing, children with hollow eyes, all standing motionless, watching. Michelle felt like prey observed by predators. She started her engine, drove through the town's streets looking desperately for any exit. But every route circled back to the main street, the same buildings, the same watching figures. The town was spatially impossible, folding in on itself, a trap disguised as a settlement. Michelle stopped near what looked like a town square, a central area with a dry fountain and weathered gazebo. On the fountain's edge sat a man younger than the others, wearing relatively modern clothing, jeans and a flannel shirt that looked maybe 20 years old. Michelle rolled down her window. "Hey, can you help me? I can't find the way out." The man looked at her with exhausted eyes. There isn't a way out. That's the point of persistence. It persists. We persist. Nothing changes, nothing leaves, nothing ends. Michelle felt tears of frustration. How did you get here? The man stood, walked closer. Same as you. Took an exit that shouldn't exist, needed something, fuel, food, rest. The town provides, but it doesn't release. I've been here since 2003, 21 years driving the same streets, watching the same shadows, trapped in the same night. That's impossible, Michelle said. Someone would search for you, police, family. They can't find this place, the man interrupted. Persistence exists between spaces, accessible only through exits that appear and disappear randomly. When we drove in, we fell out of normal geography. Our trucks are still out there somewhere, abandoned on highways, but we're here. Separate, trapped. He gestured at the watching figures. Everyone here made the same mistake. Some have been trapped for decades. The oldest ones barely remember their previous lives. We're specimens collected by whatever intelligence created this place, observed endlessly, preserved in amber. Michelle refused to accept this. She'd escaped impossible situations before, the mirror route, the phantom truck stops. There had to be a way out. She drove more systematically, examining every inch of the town's perimeter. Behind the motel, she found something, a narrow dirt track barely visible leading into the desert. It wasn't much, but it was different from the obviously impassable routes. She followed it, tires crunching on gravel and hardpan. The track wound through increasingly rough terrain, climbing toward distant hills. Behind her, the town's lights dimmed, receding. Hope surged. Maybe this was the exit. But after 2 miles, the track simply ended at the base of a sheer cliff. Michelle stopped, staring at the rock face. It stretched hundreds of feet upward, impassable. She reversed, tried another bearing. Every route she attempted ended in impassable terrain. Cliffs, boulder fields, dry lake beds that would bog her truck instantly. The town remained visible always, lights calling her back. She drove for hours, trying every possible direction, finding only dead ends. Finally, exhausted and defeated, she returned to the town square. The young man still sat there, waiting. "You understand now," he said. It wasn't a question. Michelle sat in her truck, mind breaking. She'd spent her career mastering highways, understanding roads, navigating America's transportation infrastructure with expertise. But this place defied all logic, all geography, all hope. She was trapped permanently, doomed to join the hollow-eyed figures walking persistence's streets for eternity. Days passed, or what felt like days. Time became meaningless in perpetual darkness. Michelle tried maintaining routines, sleeping, eating from her truck's supplies, exercising. But gradually, inexorably, her will eroded. She began walking the streets like the others, observing the empty buildings, waiting for nothing. Then, on what her clock claimed was the 7th day, something changed. A sound penetrated the silence. An engine, distant, but approaching. Michelle ran toward it, seeing headlights descending the impossible exit ramp she'd originally followed. A new truck, new driver, entering the trap. Michelle realized what she had to do. As the truck pulled into the gas station, she ran toward it, waving frantically. The driver, a young man, maybe 25, climbed down, looking confused. "Don't fuel here!" Michelle shouted. "Turn around now! This place traps you!" The young man stared at her. "What are you talking about?" Michelle grabbed his arm. "I've been trapped here for a week. This town doesn't let people leave. You have to turn around before you go deeper." Understanding dawned in the young man's eyes, recognition of her desperation, her honesty. He climbed back into his cab. Michelle ran to her own truck. Together they drove back toward the exit ramp. The old woman from the gas station stood in the road, blocking their path, other figures emerging from buildings. But two trucks together had momentum. Wait. They accelerated, the woman diving aside at the last second. They reached the ramp, climbing back toward US 50. Behind them, Persistence's lights flared brightly, angry at losing prey. The ramp seemed longer going up, endless climbing through darkness. Michelle's fuel gauge dropped rapidly, engine straining. But ahead, she saw something beautiful. Highway lights, US 50, normal reality. They burst onto the highway together, two trucks emerging from an exit that shouldn't exist. Michelle looked in her mirrors. The exit ramp was gone, sagebrush-covered desert where it had been seconds before. She radioed the young man. "Thank you. If you hadn't arrived, I'd still be trapped." His voice came back shaky. "You saved me. I was about to fuel up." They drove together to Ely, neither willing to separate until they'd reached confirmed civilization. At the truck stop, they compared experiences, confirmed they'd both witnessed the same impossibility. Michelle fueled her truck, 389 per gallon, gloriously normal, and completed her delivery to Denver. But she never forgot. Persistence, the town that collected drivers like specimens, the trap disguised as salvation. She began marking maps with locations where impossible exits appeared, warning other drivers through CB networks and trucking forums. Some believed her, most didn't. But those who'd experienced similar phenomena recognized truth in her warnings. Michelle continued driving but never trusted exits advertising unexpected services. She learned that America's highways held countless traps. Places designed to catch the unwary, the desperate, the unlucky. Persistence was just one, probably the most obvious. Others were subtler, more insidious. But all shared one characteristic. They offered what drivers needed most: fuel, rest, escape, at exactly the moment when refusal seemed impossible. Michelle's lesson was hard-won. In the infinite landscape of American highways, the last exit before civilization might not lead to safety but to perdition, and the most dangerous services were those that appeared when you needed them most. Traps baited with desperation, waiting patiently in the darkness between mile markers for the next driver to make the fatal mistake of seeking refuge in places that persisted long after they should have faded into forgotten memory.